Dean looked at Dave and said, Man, I'm starving. I got your back if you go to Gino's and get us some subs? My treat. Dude, that's across town. It would take me at least 30 minutes to get there. Why don't we just order something takeout? We'll be done faster that way. Yeah, I know, but we deserve a treat, and the boss is paying for it. He never said we should get anything close, you know? All he cares about is that we get this program done ASAP and let him know when we're leaving so he can close our timesheets and set our alarms. Come on, man. Okay, you're the boss, Dave said, getting up to leave the cavern they called the programming room and server room. As Dave knew, traffic was backed up on Friday night. Plus, Gino's was on the other side of town and was a popular night spot. He'd only been there once, but he had to admit that for bar food, it couldn't be better. Their sandwiches and even their pizza were top-notch. Dave had to drive through the parking lot twice before he found a parking spot, and naturally, pulled in near the back of the lot. On his way to the building, he passed a car that looked like his wife's car, but it couldn't have been. She was at home with her sister, who had come to visit her on her way home from college. When he got to the bar, he walked to the cash register next to the kitchen and stood there until the waitress stopped to ask what he wanted. I'm Dave Brown. I need to place an order over the phone, please. Of course, dear. I'll see if it's ready now. The waitress left for the kitchen and returned almost immediately. She said, I couldn't find an order for you. Are you sure you called it in here? Yes, my work partner called almost 20 minutes ago. I drove across town to pick him up. Are you sure you don't have him? No record of it. Who did he talk to? I don't know. Let me call him. Dave quickly pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and called Dean. When he answered, Dave asked, Hey, they don't have our order. Didn't you call? Yeah, man. You were standing there listening to me, weren't you? Shit. Well, go ahead and wait for them to make it since you're already there. I got your back. I just got off the phone with Tony. He called to see how long I thought we'd be here. I told him at least another 2 or 3 hours. So we have time. Dave checked Dean's order one more time and turned to the waitress. He said he called here. Look, I work across town and we're running late. Could you ask them to hurry up so I can get back in time? Yes, of course, dear. What will you have? Dave gave her the order and settled into a chair at the bar while he waited for the food to arrive. While waiting, he was watching the customers when he got the shock of his life. He saw his wife Sandy dancing with his boss Tony, and then saw her sister dancing next to her as well. What the hell? Dave was about to walk over and find out what was going on when suddenly his world came crashing down. Sandy stood up on her toes and kissed her partner. Dave quickly snapped a couple of pictures and turned to follow them out of the bar. They walked across the parking lot to the row where Sandy's car was parked. Dave managed to get a couple more shots while they kissed. When they got to Tony's super truck, they climbed inside and got down to it. While his heart was breaking, he took pictures on his phone. He smiled to himself when he heard Sandy ask, Honey, what's that flashing light? Tony replied, Don't worry, honey. It's probably the headlights of passing cars. Relax, no one can see us. An enraged Dave wrapped a handkerchief around his head like the robbers in old westerns did and swung the door open in front of the two lovers. He pulled Tony out of the truck, kicked him, and then rummaged through his pockets for his wallet and keys. He put the keys in the keyhole on the back door of the truck and took the wallet with him. He hoped that the two lovers would not see the keys and the truck would eventually be stolen. He planned to throw the wallet out the window as he drove through the bad part of town on his way to the office. Dave quickly made his way back to the bar and took his seat. Soon the waitress came over and said, There you are. I thought you'd left or something. Your order is ready. No, I've been here the whole time. I was talking to a friend of mine. I apologize for not noticing you sooner. No problem. Here's your food. Thanks, Dave said, took his food, and walked out of the bar. He walked to his car in a roundabout way to reduce the chance of being seen by his cheating wife and boss. Before he got in his car, he saw Sandy helping Tony into the truck and trying to calm him down. During the drive through town, Dave was shaking with anger. Twice he almost had an accident because of it. Finally, he pulled into the parking lot of his office and walked into the building carrying his food. He remembered to close the door behind him and angrily headed toward the server room where they worked. When he entered the room carrying the food, Dean smiled and said, "About damn time you got back. What did you do? Popped home for a bit?" Dave tossed the bag of food onto Dean's workstation and nearly collapsed into the chair next to him. Dean turned and yelled, "What the hell?" He stopped when he saw Dean's face and then continued, "Holy shit. You okay, dude?" "Yeah, no, not really. Sandy was there. She was having fun with Tony in the back of his truck." "Shit. Man, I'm sorry." "Yeah, but it's not your fault." "Yeah, man, kind of my fault." Dave turned to Dean, anger reflected on his face. He asked, "What do you mean by that, asshole?" "You know I'm a systems administrator. I was checking my email to make sure it was only being used for business, and I came across a group of messages from Tony and Sandy. They agreed to meet there tonight. He said he'd keep you busy here and they could have some quiet fun." "Dude, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to say anything in case she blew him off or it wasn't what I thought it would be, so I sent you out to get sandwiches so you could see if everything was okay. That's why I didn't make the phone call. I wanted you to stay there longer in case it turned out to be wrong." "Yeah, but it didn't. I've got some great triple X rated pictures of them having fun in the back seat." "Sorry, Dave. What's next?" "You ask? I'm going to release this bitch and get out of this shitty job." As you might expect, neither man was able to work anymore that evening. They spent quite a bit of time discussing Dave's next steps. Dave showed Dean the pictures and told him what he had done to Tony as well. Dean laughed and said, "That's good. If he shows up here tomorrow for work, we'll have to be sure we give him a serving of shit, especially if he moves carefully." Dave sat in the chair for a bit longer, then got up and started to gather his things. Dean watched him for a bit, then said, "Hey, kid, are you leaving? We're not done yet, and I won't have time to finish without you." "Yeah, I'm leaving. Screw Tony and his goddamn job. Sorry, man." "Dave, wait a minute. You can't just pick up and leave. What are you gonna do? Go home and bump into that bitch? What about Tony? You can't just let him get away with it. You gotta plan it, or you're gonna lose more in the divorce than you have to. Come on, man. Let's get this over with and make plans for you. They don't need any more warning than you have to give them." It was 2:30 in the morning when they had finished their project and could go home. They were standing in front of the door to the office when Dean tried to call Tony to remotely lock the doors and set off the security alarm. For some reason, he wasn't answering. As they tried to call him, they laughed at the fact that he wasn't answering. Finally, after 20 minutes, Dean called the head of security and said he couldn't reach Tony and needed him to lock the doors and set off the alarm. Before they got into their cars, Dean said, "You know, this is bull. It's the only place I've ever worked where I didn't have a key and an alarm code. If something goes wrong inside after hours, we'll have to wander around until Tony or the guard on duty meets us here or unlocks and disables the alarm." Dean gave himself an odd look before saying, "You know, it just hit me. The only time we have to call Tony is when we're working late. I wonder if it's because he's messing around with other wives, too." "I don't know, but I don't care. I'm going to make him pay for it, too. I'm tired. I'll see you tomorrow. Well, I guess I'll see you tonight. See you later." Sandy still wasn't home when Dave walked into their little rented house. He was still angry about what he had seen and wanted to argue with her, but was glad she wasn't there. He wondered where she was, but figured she was probably with the jerk. Dave took a quick shower and fell into bed. He fell asleep almost as soon as he lay down and knew nothing until the sun hit his eyes the next morning at 9:30. Pulling back the covers, he noticed that Sandy was completely awake on her side of the bed. Before getting dressed, he made his way to the kitchen and put the coffee on to brew. After drinking the coffee, eating a quick breakfast of a frozen sandwich and drinking more coffee, Dave went to work. He was still very angry and was trying to figure out how to make Tony and Sandy pay for what they had done. When he got to work, he found everyone there except Tony. He asked Sheila, Tony's secretary, where he was and she said, "I don't know. I haven't heard from him at all. It had been a long day because Dave and Dean were still exhausted from the late work, but the project was in its final stages. The rest of the group was busy checking code and trying to load the program before installing it on the customer's servers. Dave paced from place to place, watching the work and trying to stay awake. He was having a hard time concentrating on work because of his discovery the night before. Finally, it was time for dismissal, and he came home. Sandy was lying on the couch with a glass of wine, dressed in her old, tattered robe. She had large, dark circles under her eyes. When he entered the room, she looked up at him with a guilty expression on her face. Dean immediately asked, "Where the hell were you last night? You didn't even call to say you wouldn't be home, and then you didn't even show up at all. And where's your sister? I thought she was going to stay with us for a couple days. She got a call and had to leave early. I took her to the airport yesterday afternoon, and on the way home I stopped for a drink with the girls. It was awful. One of them got mugged in the parking lot and I spent the night in the hospital with her. I'm sorry I didn't call, but the battery in my phone was dead." "And you couldn't find a phone at the hospital, borrow a charger, or use the nurses?" "I just didn't think. I'm sorry, honey." "Yes, of course you are. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were fooling around somewhere. What are we having for dinner?" "I haven't gotten to that yet. What do you want?" "I don't know. Something quick? I'm tired. I didn't leave until 3:30 last night, and I didn't fall asleep until 3. I really don't have anything quick to make. Why don't I order a pizza?" "Yeah, okay. I'll go get cleaned up." As Dave showered, he kept thinking about how he could get revenge and get out of the mess Sandy had made of their marriage. While he was showering, a thought occurred to him that seemed to work and would be a sure way to find out about Sandy's infidelity. Tony had only a rudimentary knowledge of computers and programming. He was the business manager of the company, but had only a minor education in programming. He considered himself an expert and was constantly causing problems for his employees. His attempts at programming showed Dave how inept he was. Dave decided that he would create a web page and put pictures of Tony and Sandy on it. He would then send himself an email with the website address so that he could legally find out about their date. He would have to hack into Tony's home or office computer and use it to create the page using Tony's name, address, and personal information. He went to an internet cafe that same day and set to work, having first hacked into Tony's home computer. Before he started setting up the web page, he, like most hackers, scanned the hard drives to see what he could find. Jackpot. He found pictures of Tony with several other women. 2 of these women Dave knew were married to men who worked with him. Copying the folder of photos to his computer, Dave quickly began work on the web page. It took him several days to complete the programming and get the site up and running. Every action had to be completed and posted on Tony's home computer to make it look like he was the one doing the work. Some days he was unable to work on the site for personal reasons, or because Tony turned off his computer. Once the site was up and running, he started working on other ways to get revenge. A few days after the site went live, Dave prepared an email with a link that he sent out to everyone he could find who knew Tony, Sandy, or the other women. Presumably, that's how he found out about Sandy's infidelity. After receiving the email, Dave told Sandy about it and got all the excuses from the cheater's handbook. "I'm sorry, honey, it was nothing. It was just a one-time thing. I just ran into him there when my sister and I went out to eat, etc. etc." Dave went back to work the next morning and confronted Tony, then quit on the spot, leaving Tony with yet another bruise on his face. The divorce quickly turned nasty, with Sandy first trying to get Dave to reconcile and then starting to countersue. At this time, feelings flared up and she decided to get revenge on Dave for daring to divorce her. She turned him into the prosecutor for running an internet gambling site. The site was Dave's brainchild and started as a hobby where he and his friends would play Texas Hold'em with each other. The site soon grew and grew until Dave opened it up to everyone around the world. Everyone who joined the site was given 2,000 K chips, no cash value, and was given another 1 million each day as a bonus to play. When the site first opened, if a person lost all their chips, they could only play again the next day. After the site had been running for 2 months, Dave, as the administrator, received so many requests for additional chips that he created a way for people to purchase them and continue playing. It wasn't a gambling site, per se, because no one received anything in return for their payments other than the right to continue playing with the chips they received or purchased. Dave had been running the site for over a year when his marriage fell apart and was making obscene amounts of money from it. When he found out about Tony nailing Sandy, he was ready to quit his job and devote all his time to the site. But first, he wanted to finish the project he and Dean had been working on. Over the past year, he had added other card games and even slot machines to the site. He was amazed at how much money people sent him to buy chips for the games and never won anything but extra chips, which they eventually lost. Now he was happy that all his purchases went directly into a bank account in the Cayman Islands. He was registered with the company and only received a minimum wage from it. As far as he knew, no one even realized he was the sole owner of the company. He knew that Sandy thought he was just a contract programmer. Now he was glad that was the case. She might be able to get some of his small salary from the web company, but probably not. Ever since he quit his job at Tony's company, he'd been making less than she was. During the divorce proceedings, Sandy turned Dave into the police as the owner of an online casino. They investigated and called him in for questioning twice, but since he was an employee, and none of the players were getting anything for their money but chips to play with next, they found no reason to prosecute. Her attempt to get him in trouble only made him even angrier, and he became even more intransigent about the divorce. Finally, after 7 months of fighting, the divorce was final. Dave was ordered to provide Sandy with minimal support for 3 years, based on the fact that he was still working when the divorce was filed. She graciously agreed to take a lump sum in lieu of monthly payments, and Dave was a free man. He didn't want to stay in the city where his life had become hell, so he decided to leave. Dave loaded all his belongings into a truck and a 14-foot trailer and hit the road, heading for parts unknown. One of his first stops had to be a nice river where his grandfather and father used to take him fishing. They'd camp on the gravel bank, catch, clean, and eat fish right there. Damn, his mouth watered at the memory. Dave found a gravel strip and set up camp just in time for an evening of fishing on the creek. The fish were nibbling and he had a hearty time, quickly forgetting why he had come and began to enjoy his time on the river. He camped, swam, and fished for 2 days before he ran out of drinks and staples. Leaving camp, he jumped in his truck and headed to the nearest town where there was a grocery store. The town was small, only 850 people if the sign was to be believed, but it still had a small grocery store and a cafe where all the farmers hung out when they could carve out time. Dave was sad to see the town as he drove by. He remembered that it had been much larger and busier when he was younger. Some of the old houses stood empty, and many of the smaller ones were almost falling apart. There were a few for sale signs hanging on the empty houses, and he wondered how long ago they had been for sale. Some yards looked like they hadn't been mowed all year, and probably hadn't been mowed in previous years. One of the nicest and largest homes from last year was completely hidden from the road by the trees and shrubbery that sprawled across the yard. Only the glow of metal on the roof could be seen through the treetops. This house belonged to one of the doctors who worked at the hospital, now closed, in town. It once had 40 beds and was often completely filled with patients. Now it was just another empty building on the main street of town. So sad. Dave was surprised to find that the local small private telephone company was still in operation. They had old equipment installed years ago when his grandfather had a small cabin on the river nearby. Now he was getting curious. Before buying groceries, Dave decided to treat himself to a meal at the cafe. To his surprise, once inside, he found that the phone company had upgraded. They now provided internet and cable TV service over their lines. After a very tasty burger, Dave went back to his truck and got his computer. He quickly settled down at a quiet table and began working on his website, doing the work he couldn't do on the river, using his phone as an access point. He got a few curious looks as he worked, but no one bothered him, except for the waitress asking if he needed anything. He was completely immersed in his work. When he closed his laptop, The owner of a small cafe came up to him and said, "You don't see much like this around here? I'm thinking of discontinuing my internet subscription since no one but a few kids use it. I haven't seen you here before. If you don't mind me asking, what have you been doing for so long? I've heard you typing, more than if you were just sitting on the internet. Are you new in town?" "Yeah, no, I don't mind. I'm vacationing on the river while I recover from a nasty divorce. When I was a kid, my grandpa and I used to fish and camp near here, and I loved it. I decided to see if it would help me relax. As for what I've been doing, I have a website and I've been doing some stuff on it that I couldn't do as well using my phone as a hotspot. I hope you didn't mind." "No, it's fine. That's why we set up the internet. Partly for ourselves and to help, but I was hoping it would attract customers as well. The phone company gave me a basic video package for free for advertising if I agreed to pay for the internet, so I agreed." "And how long do you intend to work here?" "I don't know exactly. I guess until I get tired and want to move on. Everything I own is in my truck or trailer. I left my old house after my divorce and planned to just drive until I found a place I wanted to stop. This was my first stop and I haven't gotten tired of it yet." "Wow, free legs and freedom of imagination. Must be nice." "In a way it is, but I've always wanted to find a place and a job to my liking. Put down roots, find a good woman and start a family. It hasn't worked out with that so far, so I'm wandering again." "Well, good luck. I need to get back to the kitchen. Let me know if you need anything else." Dave watched as the woman turned and walked back into the kitchen. Just before she entered the kitchen, he called out, "Hey, if it's not too much trouble, could you get me a salad, another burger and fries? And what time does the grocery store close?" "Sure, honey. I'll get it right away. You might want to stop by the store before you eat. They close at 6 and it's 5:30 now. If you don't, you won't have time to eat before they close. If you want, I can wait a few minutes while I make you dinner and you can get groceries." Dave smiled and said, "Thanks. I'll do that. Be right back," and stood up and headed for the door. Dave walked down the street about a block and entered a small grocery store. He quickly walked through the rows, selecting items from his list: canned soup, bread, chips, and a few cans of vegetables. Then, he headed to the refrigerators where he picked up lettuce, cheese, lunch meat, and even a couple small steaks. Like most small-town stores, the prices were considerably higher than in the big cities, but having no business in a big city, when you considered the cost of fuel, they were quite reasonable. He quickly paid for his purchases and walked back to his truck where he put the cold groceries in the refrigerator. The truck was equipped with an inverter, so the cooling was ice-free. The small camping generator on the trailer charged the batteries so he could use it on the river as well as lighting at night and charging his computer and phone. Dave walked back into the cafe and smiled when he saw the hostess carrying a salad to the table he had been sitting at all day. She placed the salad, dressing, and a few crackers in front of his chair and said, "Here you go. I put the burger in for you when I saw you packing the groceries in the truck. It won't take long." By the time Dave finished his meal, there were several other customers in the little cafe. Some were alone, a few couples and one family. When he paid, the woman thanked him for his business and said, "I hope you'll come again. It was nice to have someone here during the day. It can get lonely here sometimes. If you're still here, come and join us for lunch on Sunday. My specialty is fried chicken with all the spices. Well, of course, we have the usual dishes too." I think I will." "Thanks," Dave said, and turned to leave. A few days later, Dave returned to town, and the first thing he did was head to the cafe. Once inside, he stopped for some reason and looked at the bulletin board on the wall next to the cash register. There hung a list of properties for sale and one notice on county letterhead about a property being auctioned off on the courthouse steps for non-payment of taxes. The sale will be held next Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Twyla, the owner of the cafe, saw him looking over the list and smiled before greeting him. "Good to see you again, Dave. How are you doing?" "Good, Twyla. I needed to get some groceries, so I thought I'd stop by for another one of your good burgers." "Okay. Do you want one now or will you wait a bit?" "I guess I'll wait." He picked up his computer case and continued. "I thought, if you don't mind, I'd do a little work first." Sure, can I get you anything right now? Yes, unsweetened iced tea would be nice. When Twyla brought him the tea, she asked, Saw you looking at the bulletin board. Are you looking for something or just looking? Mostly just looking. I started looking at the auction listings and then I saw all the properties for sale. It surprised me that all the properties were being sold for non payment of taxes. It seemed to me that there were 3 or 4 places. Yes, there are. The same ones year after year, only now and then new ones come up. One of them is old Doc Fisker's house. It's been listed for 6 years and nobody's even put it up for auction. As far as we know, he has no family left after his death, and no one needs the house enough to buy it. Of course, that's not surprising. There are several houses for sale in town, and perhaps 1 or 2 a year sell. Where is his house located, Twyla? You drive past it as you enter town. You can see the yard from here. See all those trees on the hillside by the creek? Every now and then you can see the roof glisten when the sun hits it. Yes, I can see it. It looks like a pretty big house. Strange that no one wants it. Once upon a time, it was not only the biggest house in town, it was also the swankiest. I don't know how it is now. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in really bad shape. Kids must have broken in the door and made a mess in there. A couple other empty houses burned down from them getting in, getting high on dope and setting them on fire. Dave didn't know why, but he was intrigued by the big house hidden in the thicket of the yard. He felt calmer and, surprisingly, happier in this small town than he had in months or even years. Every now and then while he worked, he would just sit and think about the old house and the tax sale. Finally, Dave managed to get his mind off the thoughts of the old house, and he got to work. At about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he closed the computer and leaned back in his chair. Twyla saw him and called out from the kitchen. Are you ready for lunch, Dave? Yes, thank you, Twyla. I'm thinking another salad and a burger, but can we add onion rings to the burger today? Sure, I'll be right out, she said. While he waited for his portion, Dave made small talk with a couple of farmers who had not yet left after lunch. One of them said, Been seeing you around for a couple weeks now. Did you move nearby or something? No, not really. Got rid of my cheating wife, quit my job when I found out she was with my boss, loaded everything I owned into a trailer and left. My grandfather used to bring me out here in the summer to fish, so I camp on the same old gravel pad we used to use and try to relax. Every once in a while I stop in here for groceries and one of Twyla's burgers. I use her internet to do the work I can't do using my phone as a hotspot. I thought you said you quit your job. What kind of work were you able to do from the cafe? As a part-time job, I ran an internet gaming page and still do. I do housekeeping here and keep the site in order, so I still have some money. I don't know what half of that means. I guess you're just one of the guys I've heard about. Say, you're not the guy who lives in the old trailer on the river, are you? Maybe I am. I didn't piss anybody off, did I? No. Joe's used to people parking and fishing on that gravel strip. Hell, everybody's been doing that for years. As long as you don't tear anything up and let his cows out, he doesn't mind. Shortly thereafter, the two farmers paid up and left. When Dave saw Twyla paying them off, he decided it was time for him to leave too. He paid the bill and went to the store to get groceries. After loading the groceries into the truck, he climbed in and started to drive out of town. For some reason, as he started to drive past the old doctor's house, he stopped. Dave wanted to see the old house. With great difficulty, he managed to get through the shrubbery, but he did get there. The house appeared to be a story and a half, at least locally. He couldn't tell how many rooms were in the attic, but he was sure there were several. As you might expect, there were rotting boards on the walls, wooden porches, and windows. Naturally, the old house was in dire need of a paint job. The windows were all old wooden single-pane windows, but surprisingly, not a single pane was broken. The galvanized metal roof still gleamed on the building. Dave felt guilty, but found a window that could be opened and climbed into the old house. For almost an hour, he wandered around the house, inspecting it. As far as he could tell, the old bones, the frame of the house, were still very good. The arrangement of the rooms was better than most old houses. There were 2 outbuildings on the 4 or 5 acre lot, a detached two-car garage, and a small barn. When he finished looking around, he struggled to get out of the yard, climbed into his truck, and returned to the trailer on the riverbank. For the next 3 days, Dave couldn't stop thinking about the old house and how much he liked the small town. Monday morning, he went into town again and stopped at the old house. He followed the same old path to the back of the property and looked over the buildings and grounds again. Something about the house drew him in, and he sat down on the steps of the old porch, looking out over the shrubby front yard. It was almost noon when Dave returned to his truck and drove the short distance to the cafe to get lunch. As he took his order, Twyla smiled and asked, "What did you think of Doc's old house?" "What?" "Oh, come on, Dave. I can see the place from here like the back of my hand, and I saw you stop by last week and again this morning before you came in here. Hell, half the town knows you've been snooping around. So what do you think?" "I don't know. There's something about this place that calls to me, but it looks like it's going to take a lot of work to make it livable again. Just tidying up the yard would be a big job, and the whole house needs modernizing. A lot of rotten boards need to be replaced, and I won't know about the framing until after I remove the siding or paneling inside. Apparently, the wiring and plumbing will need to be completely redone. I just don't know." "Yeah, that's probably why no one else is bidding. Yeah, and no one else wants to live out here in the middle of nowhere. So, do you want another burger tonight or something else?" "Burger and rings, please, Twyla." As he sat and waited for his lunch, Dave kept looking toward the old house. He didn't even go to his website while he waited. The whole time he ate, he kept looking toward the house and then forced himself to log onto his computer and do what little work he had left to do. Soon he finished his work, and instead of going to the grocery store to get supplies, he returned to his camp. He spent most of the day at the computer, checking his finances, doing bookwork, and programming scenery changes for the site. There were over 50,000 players on his site, and they were spending an average of $5 a week to buy chips. Of course, some were good enough or lucky enough to never buy chips, while others bought them almost daily. If this trend had continued, he would have made about $13 billion in a year. Depending on the year and the value of the equipment, his profits were usually 15 to 20% of the total. Dave had had a restless night and got up just after dawn. As he sipped his coffee, he watched the sun set behind the trees and reflected on his life and the day itself. Without even thinking about what he was doing, he filled a large insulated cup with coffee, jumped into his truck, and headed into town. This time, he passed the small town turnoff and took the highway to Knott City, the county seat. He found a parking space and wandered to the courthouse just after 9:30 a.m. After confirming the location of the upcoming tax and court sale, he froze in anticipation. At exactly the appointed time, the sheriff and two suits approached him with a tall, skinny man dressed in worn Levi's and a blue chambray western cut shirt. His outfit was completed with cowboy boots and a white Stetson hat. The newly arrived men looked around at the half-dozen people gathered nearby before the sheriff spoke. "Good morning, everyone. We're getting ready to auction off some foreclosed properties, as well as a few properties that are delinquent on their taxes. If that's what you're gathered here for, please step closer and we'll get started." 3 or 4 men stepped back. The rest approached the men. The auctioneer stepped forward with a microphone and held out a paper to one of the suits. He read the paper, then described the property, its address, the payment requirements, and the starting bid. The foreclosed property was sold first, and most of the bidders left, leaving only Dave and 2 others. Before the first property was described and the second part of the auction began, the tax sale rules were announced. The 2 farms were sold first, then Dave watched the other 2 bidders get ready to leave. The men looked at Dave and one of them said, "Are you here for the sale, sir?" "Yes." "All the land is sold. All we have are a few old abandoned houses. Are you interested in one of them?" "Yeah, maybe I'm crazy, but I'm interested in one old house in Thomasville." One of the men shuffled through the remaining papers, then asked, "Which one is it, sir? We have 3 packages to Thomasville." Dave gave them the address, and the man began to sort through the papers for Doc's house. He looked them over and said, The taxes on this place total $1,575, 9 years in arrears, and this year's taxes are due by December 31st. The minimum bid is the balance of the taxes, sir. Dave didn't even think about it. He said, I bid $1,575. The men looked at each other, and the auctioneer gave his speech, then put the gavel down and said, Sold for $1,575. Dave spent the rest of the day in town, first processing the property and filling out all the paperwork, deeds, record of registration, and even making the address his permanent residence to change his mailing address and legal residence. He registered to vote and even stopped by the power company to arrange for electricity. It was almost 4 in the afternoon when he left the store and headed back to Knot City. He parked outside a cafe and entered the cool lounge. As soon as he sat down at a table, Twyla came over to him and greeted him. What are you going to do tonight, Dave? She asked. I think I'll have one of your chicken fried steaks, potatoes and gravy, and string beans tonight, please. Will do. Where have you been all day? I didn't expect to see you for a couple more days since you were out yesterday. Yeah, spent the day in town and didn't feel like cooking when I got back to camp. Dave was done with the food as soon as Twyla brought it over, paid the bill, and headed back to the campground. He parked, undressed, and dove into the cool, refreshing water for an afternoon swim. After his swim, he gathered up almost all of his gear that had been lying around idle. Almost all of it was secured because he'd been gone all day, and sat back to watch the sun go down. The next morning, after a quick breakfast and morning coffee, Dave finished packing up his stuff, hitched the trailer to the truck, and headed into town and to his new home. During the hour of work, several people stopped and talked to him. Some watched for a few minutes while he cleared brush and undergrowth from the rest of the driveway. It took all day to clear the driveway and a spot big enough to park the truck and trailer. Finally, he put the trailer in the right spot and unhooked it. Grabbing his bag, he headed for the creek at the edge of his property. There was a chest-deep hole there that was easy to reach, so he waded across and took a good swim, then went back to the trailer, took off his wet shorts, and changed into clean clothes. After he finished dressing, Dave walked almost 2 blocks to the cafe. He arrived fairly late, and the cafe already had half a dozen tables with customers sitting around them, either eating or waiting for their portion. Dave took his usual table by the window and smiled as Twyla approached him with a glass of water. She placed the water on the table in front of him, smiled, and said, Well, you're definitely going to be the talk of the town now. I can't believe you bought this old house. Isn't it in really bad shape? It's been better, but I believe it has strong bones. I'll have to splurge on repairs, but when it's finished, I'll have a nice place. I could use some help, though. Do you know anyone who could help me take it apart and clean up the yard? Maybe. Have you looked on the bulletin board? Sometimes there's something there. I see you moved your trailer into that yard over there. Will you be working around there now? Yes. I'll be there or here, I suppose, for quite a while. I'm going to do as much of the work myself as I can. It took Dave nearly 2 hours to eat and leave the cafe. Everyone in the building, all men and a few women, stopped by his table to talk about the old house. He even had a couple of leads for people who might be able to help him. Dave was in no hurry to finish the house, so he was in no hurry to hire help. Money didn't play a big part, but it was there. His income was in the Caymans, and he himself received only a small salary as an employee of his company, so he didn't have to pay U.S. taxes on the amounts he left offshore. If he used money from the business to do a job, he would have to pay tax on the excess amount. One morning, Dave was sitting under his favorite tree resting from his exertion when 2 young women came into the yard and cheerfully greeted him. Seeing them, Dave was almost speechless. They were both tall for women, about 5 feet 8 inches or so, and cute as bug ears. He'd seen them both around town, the blonde sometimes working at a coffee shop. He'd also seen the other Hispanic woman sitting in the cafe, occasionally talking and laughing with the blonde, but he didn't know their names. They were both almost bouncing with suppressed energy, and the blonde smiled before saying, Hi, Dave. We've been watching you work, and Mom said you've been talking about hiring help, but we haven't seen anyone helping you. We both work at the cafe for Mom, but we don't make much money. Tina and I were wondering if you would hire us as helpers. So you're Twyla's daughter? I've seen you both around, but I didn't know you. The blonde giggled and replied, Yep, I'm Jen, well, Janice, but I address her by her first name, Jen, and this is Tina. We're twins and we do everything together. Dave looked at the two very different girls and said, Twins? Jen laughed and replied, Well, we have different parents, but we're kind of twins. We were born on the same day, but 20 minutes apart in the same hospital. That's why we call ourselves twins. We've been best buddies forever. I've thought about hiring assistants, but I haven't decided yet. There are a few things that would be easier to do with help, but I don't have a lot of money, so I'm putting things off. I'm not really in a hurry to finish the job, so I'm letting things take their course. I just want to be able to move in before the cold weather hits this fall. And the two girls looked at each other for a moment before Tina said, Anything we can do will help a lot. We're both going to college this fall, and we need to earn as much money as we can. We don't know much about construction, but we can do a lot if you show us how. Well, maybe I can help a little. I remember what it was like to be a poor college student. What course are you in? What's your major? John replied, We are starting our sophomore year. I want to be an elementary school teacher, and Tina is going to study computer technology. They chatted for a few more minutes before John said, We should get going. We promised Mom we'd help out a little today. I'll see you later. Dave watched as the two beauties strode down the street and into the cafe. He watched them all the way. When they were out of sight, he got up and went back to his work. He was pulling windows out of the house and replacing them with triple-pane PVC windows. Each window opening had to be resized so that standard-sized windows could be used rather than buying more expensive, custom-made ones. It was much, much cheaper, but much more labor-intensive. Shortly before noon, Dave dismissed himself and went to the cafe to have lunch. This time, as he walked inside and headed to his table, Jan and Tina jumped up and greeted him. Twyla was already heading to his table when she saw the girls walk up to him. She smiled and walked back into the kitchen where the girls had just come from. Hi, Dave, Tina said. What can we get you today? I think I'd like a chicken enchilada platter today, please, and an iced tea. Jen smiled and said, I'll get it right away. You're going to love it. Tina and her mom made it, and they cook just fine. Finishing his meal, Dave walked over to the cash register to pay. He smiled when Twyla greeted him. I can't say this is the first time, but these two sure made their way over this afternoon. I usually have to ask them to wait at the table if I'm busy in the kitchen with Tina's mom. I've seen them here before, but today was the first time I met and talked to them. They came up and asked me for a job. They said you sent them. What? You're kidding. No, I didn't suggest they ask you for a job. I just mentioned that you were talking about hiring someone part-time to help with the harder work. I can't believe they asked for help with remodeling. I won't say they are lazy, they are not, but they are very picky about what work they will do. They help out here from time to time but complain about it all the time. I can't believe they want to do the hard work they'll have to do if you hire them. So you don't recommend them? No, I didn't say that. If you give them a job, they'll do their best to do it right, and for their pay, they'll give you an honest day's work. I'm just surprised they agreed to do the work and asked you about it. Oh, I didn't say anything about hiring them. I try to do as much as I can myself to save money, but I'll need help soon. Do you think they're strong enough to do the heavy work? Do they know anything about construction at all? John doesn't know, but Tina's father is a contractor, and she used to go to construction sites with him a lot when she was younger. I think she knows quite a bit. So, how was dinner? You surprised me by not taking your invariable hamburger tonight. Dave laughed and said, It was really good. I still like your hamburgers, but I wanted to try something different, and I really like a good Tex-Mex. This would be perfect with chips and salsa. We talked about doing that, but we'd have to charge a little more, and we couldn't just bring them in early like they do in Mexican restaurants. I understand, but to me it's just Mexican food. You should work on a good pizza too. I don't feel like driving to the county center when I want pizza. Twyla laughed and replied, You don't want much, do you? You know you can't have such a big menu in such a small place. Maybe you'd like to work here and pay for all that extra stock? Dave laughed and said, No, not really. I'm just saying. Twyla smiled and Dave stood up, getting ready to go back to his work. She followed him to the cash register and took the money. Then they went their separate ways again. The next morning, Dave had barely gotten to work when Jen and Tina showed up, dressed the same as the day before. Hey, Dave, Tina said. What are we doing today? Dave frowned before answering. Well, I was going to finish repairing the siding so I could paint it in the next day or two. What are you two doing today? Ian looked a little guilty or maybe scared and said, Whatever you want. We're willing to try anything. Dave didn't know what to say to that. The girls seemed to think he was going to hire them or had already hired them. He didn't know what to say or do and just froze for a moment. The girls started to get worried and were about to leave when he finally said, Well, if you're sure you want to do something here, I guess I could use some help, but you shouldn't be dressed to do anything too dirty or heavy. Dave looked around at the work that needed to be done, and a thought occurred to him. He was working on the back of the house, replacing damaged siding and deteriorated boards, but the rest of the house was ready to be painted. He'd already peeled off the old paint that had fallen off and sanded the edges, so all that was left to do was paint. I'll tell you what, he said. I'm still working on the back of the house, but if you want to paint the outside of the house, you can do that. The paint is on the porch, and as you can see, I've still set up the scaffolding on the side so I can start on top. The girls smiled. Jan said, Come on, Tina, let's get started. They turned and hurried toward the house and their new job. Dave never knew how long the girls would be working, or if only one of them would be there. Usually when one or both were out, he found them working in the cafe when he went to lunch. Of course, he didn't work from home all the time because he had to work on his website from time to time. Sometimes he even had a little programming work that distracted him from his restoration work. He preferred to do it at the cafe because he didn't have his internet set up yet, rather than living in the house because it wasn't finished. By the end of the first week, the girls worked for him. They had finished painting one side and the front of the house. They applied 2 coats of paint and it looked amazing. They had also become very friendly with Dave and he was sure teased him with their beautiful bodies. They had too many oops moments when he could see their tops, when they wore loose blouses, and a few times one or the other put on a bloody miniskirt to climb ladders and paint. On Friday of the first full week, Dave called them into the backyard where they usually sat and relaxed under their beer-drinking tree. As best he could, he kept track of their time and arbitrarily determined an hourly rate since none of them had discussed pay. When the girls came and sat down at his invitation, he handed each a wad of bills and said, This is your paycheck for the last week and a half. Since we never discussed pay, I asked around and got a figure for the work you are doing. I hope it's enough. To his surprise, none of the women looked at or counted the money. Each of them simply stuffed it into the pockets of the tight shorts they were wearing that day. They had to stand up to do so, and as soon as the money was in their pockets, they both jumped up to him, leaned over, and to his surprise, bestowed a kiss on him. Tina said, Thanks, Dave. I'm sure the pay is good, but you didn't have to do this. We never asked for a paycheck. We just wanted to help you. It's getting so boring here since most of our friends have left town and college is over. Besides, she said, we like being with you. Why don't we come over tomorrow and just hang out instead of working? Well, sure. I was going to do some things around the house, but you don't have to, of course. No, I mean, could you not work, please, and let us just hang out? Maybe have a little fun? Dave thought for a moment and replied, Sure, I guess. I don't have any deadlines. We're almost done with the exterior, and it can be finished before the cold weather sets in. That was my main plan for the summer. I want to do a couple rooms inside so I can move in before the cold weather hits. I'm sure I can get it done, so a day off will come in handy. Both girls smiled and hugged him tightly before sitting back down. They had a couple of beers each before the girls left. They needed to clean up and go help Twyla at the cafe with the Friday night crowd. Dave was still sitting outside with his morning coffee when the two girls arrived the next morning. They came around the corner of his house, carrying a cooler in each hand. In the other hand, each had a bag of what appeared to be groceries. They quickly walked over to him, dropped their load, and leaned over to kiss him. Jen looked at him with a strange expression, then asked, "You didn't like it? We're sorry." Tina looked at him sadly when Dave asked his question, and he hastened to answer, "No, it's nothing like that. It's just that you surprised me. What sane single man wouldn't enjoy being kissed by two beautiful women? What did you bring?" "I thought we were just going to hang out and relax. Now I feel bad because I didn't bring anything special." "Don't feel bad. We just brought something to drink and some dog burgers. We saw how much you liked your mom's burgers at the cafe, and we wanted to have a sit down, so we brought them. You don't mind, do you?" "No, of course not. So what are you planning for the day since it's your party?" "Oh, nothing much," Ian replied. "Like we said, just hang out, have a few drinks, swim, and grill some burgers and dogs." John grabbed his arm and tried to pull him out of the chair. "Come on," she said. "Let's go swimming. It's too hot already to just sit around and drink coffee." Dave let himself be lifted to his feet and followed the laughing girls down the path that led from the yard to the deep swimming hole in the back of his property. It was only 150 feet away, and he could already hear people splashing and talking loudly while frolicking in the creek. He stepped back slightly and said, "Wait, wait. Let me at least get my swim trunks." "Oh, come on," Tina said. "These old shorts look really good on us. Besides, we don't want to wait. We're hot." "Yeah, I can see that," Dave muttered. Jan smiled and said, "What did you say? You think we're hot?" "Yeah, but I'm sorry you heard that. I shouldn't have said that." "Gee, of course you should have. All women should know that their men think they're beautiful, especially if they mean it. That's what you meant, isn't it?" Tina slapped John on the shoulder and hissed, "Shut up, you idiot." Dave was surprised to hear Ian and Tina's words, but decided he really hadn't heard them right and let them pull themselves toward the creek. Soon they were already swimming and splashing in the water with the other couples, although it seemed that John and Tina spent most of their time talking and playing with Dave. After a few minutes, John disappeared and quickly reappeared, carrying 3 bottles of beer and swimming noodles in the water. She handed 1 bottle each to Dave and Tina, and then sat down on her noodles and sipped her beer, relaxing and talking to everyone. Dave soon joined in the conversation and began to get to know the other people in the water. To his surprise, he quickly found that he was enjoying himself. John or Tina returned to the yard several times for beers and at noon for sandwiches. Late in the afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, John said, "Come on, you two. It's time for dinner." By then, all 3 of them were feeling the effects of the beer and thought the whole thing was hilarious. Most of their friends had left by then, and those who remained were also cooking or eating their evening meal on the beach. By then, they had had enough to drink to make things funny. Jen smiled and looked at Dave's face and then said with a giggle, "You can't even walk straight. How are you going to manage us, Davy? You have to cook the hamburgers. They need to be fried, and then we're going to have fun." Tina poured another shot of beer into Dave's hand, while Jen fired up the nearby gas grill. Once the grill was fired up, the ladies started pulling things out of the refrigerator and the bags they had brought earlier. They quickly placed the food and paper plates on the small table, then grabbed a glass of beer each and sat down with Dave while the grill heated up. When Jen decided the grill was hot enough, she said, "Dave, I think the grill is ready and you can cook the burgers and sausages, and we'll get the buns ready for the meat." She and Tina giggled as they walked to the table and started making the buns for the burgers. Soon they were eating burgers, chips, and great BBQ beans that Jen had brought from her mom's cafe. After eating, they cleaned up and headed back to the creek for a late afternoon swim. By the time they got back to the creek, everyone else had left. After cooling off, all 3 of them returned to Dave's yard and then pushed him into the tent and laid him on the bed. "Girls, what's going on here? Why are you doing this?" They both lifted up slightly to look him in the eye, and Ian said, We've seen you watching us at the cafe almost from the first day you started coming in. You've never been rude or obnoxious like most of the boys we've met, and Mom really likes you. None of us found anyone in the neighborhood or at college that we liked enough to date more than once or twice. You're the exception. We spent all summer with you, and you never treated us badly. We wanted to date you and see if there could be something between us, but you never asked, so we decided to take matters into our own hands. Okay, I guess I can understand that. You know how much my wife hurt me, and I was afraid to go out again. Plus, you're almost 5 years younger than me. I didn't think you'd be interested even if I asked. Well, you're wrong. We were and are very interested. Look, I don't know what to say. I really like both of you and I love being around you. I can't even think about picking one of you. The girls smiled and hugged him before Tina said, Okay, we don't want you to choose. Like we said, we're twins. We do everything together, and we don't want you to choose. You're stuck with both of us, Dave. Soon the women noticed that Dave wasn't answering them and looked relaxed. They looked up and saw that Dave was sleeping peacefully. Jen said, Gee, I can't believe he just fell asleep on us. Are we really that boring? Tina laughed and replied, Either that, or we gave him too much beer. Of course, he's been working hard too. Yeah, but damn. What are we going to do now? Sleep? Soon all three young men were asleep, and none of them woke up until early morning. Dave woke up before the girls. His head was splitting. He quickly put the coffee pot on and started trying to recover from the day off. No sooner had he had his first cup of coffee than both women staggered out of his tent. They didn't even speak to him as they hurried into the house to go to the bathroom. Soon they were outside again and poured a cup of coffee each before sitting down and staring at Dave, sipping the magical elixir. After they had emptied the cup, with minimal conversation, Dave looked at the women and said, You are dangerous. Now I'm going to go to the cafe and get some breakfast. Are you coming? They looked at each other for a moment before Tina replied, Yes, but I'm not sure I can eat much. As the three young people slowly walked into the cafe, Twyla looked at them, laughed, and said, I heard you guys had a blast. I hope you learned your lesson. Dave looked at her after collapsing into his usual chair with a young woman on either side of him and said, I resent that, Twyla. Contrary to rumors and someone else's plans, I remain as pure as the driven snow. They've been feeding me demon rum, but they've failed to corrupt my morals. Jen blushed and, clapping Dave on the shoulder, replied, Hey, that's my mom. You don't have to say things like that to her. Besides, you didn't swear that much before you came to bed with us. Most of the male customers laughed when she said that, and Twyla replied, You girls didn't fight. Oh, never mind. What'll you have, Dave? Dave ordered, and Twyla turned toward the kitchen. Ian said, Mom, what about us? If you want something, come with me and make it yourself. You're not a paying customer. John and Twyla looked at each other, then got up and slowly followed John into the kitchen. Everyone could hear muffled voices interspersed with the usual kitchen sounds. While the food was cooking, Dave received a few minutes of gentle remarks from his friends and even a few warnings about the girls. Soon Jen and Trina came out of the kitchen with plates of food, which they placed neatly on the table before sitting down themselves and beginning their meal. Once again, there was little conversation as all three of them tried to recover from a day of partying. Dave finished his meal a little before the women and sat while they finished theirs. When they were done, he stood up and said, I need to go home and recuperate. I'll see you two. Then headed for the cash register. Twyla met Dave at the register and took the money from him. As soon as he was outside, Jen and Tina joined him, one on each side, and put their arms around his waist. He looked at each of the women, but said nothing. He hugged each of them, and they all walked slowly toward his house. When they were in the backyard, Dave collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep almost immediately, barely noticing that both women had done the same, putting him between them again. They slept until almost noon, until nature called them again and they took turns going to the bathroom. Afterwards, they sat and drank iced tea. Dave said, Did you girls just pout your lips yesterday? Or should I be alerted to some of the things you said? Jen replied, What things? I don't remember much of our conversation. I remember laughing and goofing around a lot, but I don't remember what we or anyone else said. You know, you both said you wanted to sleep with me. Oh, that. Yeah, but you already knew that, didn't you? No, not really. I mean, I knew you were teasing me, and I was trying to decide which one of you to ask out, but nothing more than that. Dave, I think I remember us telling you that it doesn't work that way. We both really like you, and we share. Neither of us have found anyone else we care about, and we love each other like sisters. We both want you, and we don't want to hurt each other, so we agreed to share you. Is that a problem? Well, yeah, no, oh hell, I don't know. I like you both a lot, but what about your parents and everyone else in town? Tina replied, What about them? It's none of their business. We know we can't marry you, but if we get along, there's nothing stopping us from living with you. The girls continued to help Dave with the renovations and played an increasingly active role in choosing the colors, decor, and even the finishes inside the house. The first room they finished was the kitchen, and Dave found himself doing exactly what the girls wanted in it. From the kitchen, they moved on to finishing the master bedroom with a large bath made from the old living room and butler's pantry. Next on the list was the formal living room and then the dining room. The last to be completed was a small room that the doctor used as his office. It was converted into a nursery for future use. This completed the renovation of the lower floor, just in time for Thanksgiving, when the first family dinner was held. Over the winter, they began work on the upper floor, where there will be 2 large bedrooms separated by a small playroom and bath. Thanksgiving, one of the few days the cafe was closed, led to the entire extended family gathering at Dave's house for a traditional meal. Jen and Tina's parents and brothers, as well as Dave's parents, came and filled the house to capacity. Most of them didn't understand how to feel about Dave having 2 women acting as his wives. In a surprisingly short time, the family and town accepted their different lifestyle and treated it as the most natural thing in the world. Dave and his women were happy and very successful. Jen graduated from college, as did Tina. Jen got a job at an inner-city school teaching, and Tina started working with Dave, programming all sorts of games and phone apps. The money kept coming in. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video. Carol Beck leaned back in her large, comfortable office chair and turned her head toward the speaker in the ceiling above her. As she listened, the sound of another Christmas song reached her ears. Damn it, if I have to hear another goddamn Christmas song, I'm going to scream, she said quietly. Closing the door to her office, she turned on the portable radio on the desk behind her and tuned it to a classic rock station. She turned up the volume, hoping it would drown out the noise coming from upstairs. She leaned back in her chair and continued working on the spreadsheet displayed on the large monitor. After a while, she heard a knock on the door. Come in, she barked. The door opened and she saw the face of Jake Callahan, the current CEO of Callahan & Son Manufacturing. He was the son in the company's name and had succeeded his father as CEO about 7 years ago. Prior to that, he had been the CFO of the company, and he was the one who had hired her in the accounting department after she graduated from college. He was older than her by about 16 years, but in his 51 years he was in great shape and still wore a full head of dark hair with a slight gray at the temples. They had developed a strong platonic friendship over the years, but after his wife had died in a terrible car accident 8 years ago, they had grown a little closer. Over the years, he had developed strong feelings for her and wanted something more than a platonic friendship, but he didn't want to take any chances. So he acted slowly and calmly. Carol wasn't stupid and knew he wanted more from her than just a sympathetic ear and a shoulder to cry on. And while she liked Jake a lot, she wasn't about to risk her marriage. The truth was that she loved Raymond, her husband of 12 years, and she loved their 9-year-old son Tim very much. And even though they were going through some bad times right now, there was no way she was going to jeopardize that relationship. But, she admitted to herself, she had fantasized about her boss more than once over the years. And in the past few months, she'd fantasized about him much more often. Is it safe? He asked. She smiled and nodded her head. Of course, Jake, please come in. I just can't stand listening to this nonsense going around the offices, she said. He walked into the office and closed the door behind him. Please have a seat. What can I do for you today? I was wondering if you'll be going to the company Christmas party this year or skipping it like last year, he asked. She remembered that the annual party was on the 23rd and everyone would be off work until Monday, the 3rd of January. That meant she only had a few short days to get everything finished. I don't know, Jake, she said. You know how I feel about Christmas. That's right. You and Christmas are like oil and water, he said. Yeah, and I still have to finish all those reports, she told him. You have staff for that, he said. Delegate it to them. Let them do their jobs. I guess you're right, she said. Of course I'm right, he said with a smile. That's why I'm the CEO. I delegate authority to you, and you have to delegate it to them. See how that works? Why don't you shut up, get off the leash, and join me for lunch? There we can talk if you want to. The usual? She asked. Of course, he replied. The usual was a quaint little sandwich diner not too far from the factory. It wasn't too crowded at this time of day, and they could eat there in peace. They'd been going there 3 times a week for the past few years. What the hell, she said. Why don't I just take care of business and meet you there in 20 or 30 minutes? Sounds like a plan, he said. I'll see you there. A little less than half an hour later, Carol parked her BMW and walked into the diner. Jake was sitting at a table waiting for her. He smiled and waved at her. I hope you don't mind, but I ordered your usual dish, he said. Pastrami on rye bread? She asked. Of course, he said, feeling proud of himself for taking her order. Of course, she'd been eating the same dish at this diner for months now, so it was a pretty safe assumption. Thank you, she said. The waitress brought their drinks and hurried to her seat. Jake stared after her as she took a sip of her Coke. Okay. Well, that's enough, sis, he said, using his favorite name for her. She smiled and set the glass aside. She didn't mind him calling her that. She was an only child, and the idea of being someone's little sister appealed to her. What do you mean? She asked. You don't have to call me that, he said. I've known you too long. It's not just your usual Christmas bahahaha. What's wrong? Is it the nerd thing? It was Jake's nickname for Raymond, his way of showing disrespect to Carol's husband, and she hated it. Please, I asked you not to call him that, she said with a note of irritation in her voice. You're right, Jake said. I shouldn't have said it, and I regret it. But let's face it. He's a computer repair guy, and you're a top executive. You deserve so much more than that. Actually, Jake, Ray is a senior field engineer. He designs multi-million-dollar network infrastructures all over the world. He's damn good at what he does. He's highly sought after and well-respected, Carol said. Good. But still you make 3 or 4 times what he does? Asked Jake. Something like that, yes, she replied. Doesn't that bother you too? No, not really, she said. I know what you're thinking, that I'm the primary breadwinner, staying home with the baby while he's traveling around the country doing his own thing. Exactly, Jake said. Hell, it would bother me if my wife made 3 times as much as I do. Ray doesn't spare his money, she said. And he adores little Timmy. He's a great husband and father. Who's gone all the time, Jake said. Look, sis, I'm just worried about you. You were there for me when my wife died, and I want to do the same for you. I'm worried about you. Thanks, but I'll be fine, Jake, really, she said. But something else is eating you up, isn't it? He asked. She swallowed her food and thought for a moment before she spoke. Christmas Eve will be 15 years since my mom died of a heart attack, working to the point of exhaustion to take care of us, she said quietly, and tears came to her eyes at the memory of her mother. And 25 years since my father died. He died on Christmas Day when the plane he was flying crashed. He was flying east and was in a hurry to get home to us. I was 9 years old at the time. After so many years together, this is the first time you're telling me all this. No wonder you hate Christmas so much, he said. Every time Raymond gets on a plane to go to a construction site, I think it might be the last time I see him alive, she said. I don't know if I have the strength to deal with a loss like that, and I don't want to end up like my mother. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can bear his absence. You don't think he's having an affair, do you? Asked Jake. Ray? He's having an affair? Get this. No, Raymond may have his faults, but infidelity is definitely not one of them, she said. Well, sis, just know that I'm here for you, okay? You and little Timmy are always welcome guests in my house if it ever comes to that, he said. She smiled, looking at him. Thank you, Jake. That means a lot to me, she said as she put her hand on his arm. In the back of her mind, she wished Ray was sitting here instead of Jake, but she would take what she could get. If only Ray understood how she felt. My pleasure, Carol, he said with a smile. They finished their meal and Carol looked at her watch. Oh dear, I'd better get back to the office before they send out the National Guard, she joked. That's all right, he said. No one's going to take away your paycheck for having lunch with the CEO. I know, she said. It's just that I've got a lot of work to do. I hope my people made good progress. I'll see you later. Thanks for lunch and for letting me talk it out. Sure, Carol. Anytime? And I mean it. If you need anything at all, let me know, okay? I will, Jake, thanks, she said. He watched her leave the diner and walk to her car. Ray is an absolute idiot for leaving her here alone, he thought. But he added, losing Ray could very well be my gain. He smiled at the prospect of being between Carol's slender legs. Carol reached her car and looked back to see a dirty, ragged homeless man in tattered clothes and unkempt hair begging for change and cigarettes on the street. All passers-by shunned this man, avoiding him like the plague. She shook her head in disgust. Why can't these people just go out and get a job like my mother? She asked herself. She got into her car and drove off without even dignifying the man with a glance. She got to her department and found out how the reports were going. Satisfied, she grabbed everything she needed and headed to her office. Hearing Christmas music from the speaker above her head, she called the IT department and asked for someone to come and do something about it. As she sat there, one of the IT people showed up with a small ladder and twisted the volume knob until the speaker went silent. Silence, she thought. Blessed silence. Thank you, she said to the young man. You're welcome, he replied with a smile. And Merry Christmas, he added, making her grit her teeth. Same to you, she said politely as he walked away. Why can't people treat the 25th of December like any other day, she wondered. Why can't they say, Happy the 17th of April, or something like that? She closed the door and turned to her work. Before she knew it, her co-workers were already waving goodbye to her. She looked over and saw that it was 5 o'clock in the evening. Time to leave work. She took a deep breath and exhaled. There was no way she was going home with all of this. She waved and watched them put on their coats and head outside. Soon, she was the only one left in the department. She picked up the phone and called Ray's parents since they were looking after Timmy. She hated to leave the little boy with them, but they loved having him over, and he loved spending time with his grandparents. Ray's mother, Alice, picked up the phone. Hi, Mom, Carol said. She had always gotten along well with Ray's parents and had started calling them Mom and Dad shortly after she and Ray had gotten married. Well, hello, Carol, Alice said. Still at the office? I'm afraid so, she replied. It's the end of the year. You know how it is. Yes, unfortunately I do, she said. How's my boy doing? Asked Carol. He's acting like a little angel, replied Alice. Right now he's in the other room with his grandpa. He misses his daddy very much. I know, said Carol. So do I. Here, I'll let you talk to him, said Alice. A few minutes later, she heard her little son's sweet voice on the phone. Hi, Mommy, Tim said. Hi, Timmy, Carol replied. Are you having a good time with Grandma and Grandpa? Oh, yes. Grandpa is reading me a book right now. That's great, honey. How was school today? It was okay, Timmy said. Did you do your homework? Asked Carol. Yes, I did, and Grandma even checked it for me like you do, said Timmy. That's good, said Carol. I miss Daddy, said Timmy. Do you think he'll call me tonight? I'm sure he will, honey, said Carol. I'm hoping he will. Will he be home for Christmas? I think so, yes. You know how your daddy loves to spend Christmas with you, she said sadly. I love spending Christmas with him too, Timmy said. Well, I know you're probably busy, so I'll let you go. I love you, Mommy. She couldn't help but smile. Even at such a young age, Timmy was becoming very much like his father, so sweet and attentive. I love you too, sweetie, she said. Give Grandma and Grandpa a kiss goodnight from me, okay? I will. Bye. She heard him hand the phone back to Alice. Are you going to be working late again tonight? Asked Alice. I'm afraid so, Mom, replied Carol. Actually, I'll be working late every night this week. I have to get everything done before the party on the 23rd. And that's only a couple days away. Could you look after Timmy if Ray doesn't get home early? I hate to ask, but I'm under the gun, and with Ray gone... Say no more, Carol, I understand, Alice said. Thanks, Mom, I appreciate it more than you know, Carol said. It's not a big deal. We love having little Timmy here with us. He looks so much like Ray and George just loves having him around, said Alice. Thanks again. They finished talking and Carol felt sad. She was grateful to her in-laws for looking after Timmy, but she felt a little ashamed that she couldn't work and take care of her son at the same time. If only Ray were home. She pushed the thought out of her mind and plunged into her work. When the phone rang, she looked over and saw it was Ray calling her. Why was he calling so late? It was 20 past 7 p.m., but then she remembered the 2-hour time difference between Dallas and Seattle. She answered the phone. Hi, honey, she said. How are things in Seattle? Crazy, he replied. I just broke for lunch and tried to call home. Figured you were still at work when I got the answering machine. Yeah, it's the end of the year. You know how it is, she said. I know. Timmy's at Mom and Dad's, I take it? He asked. Yes, your parents were a godsend, she said. Little Timmy misses you very much. I miss him too, Ray said. He's not the only one, she said. I miss you so much, Ray. How much longer is this going to go on? It was an old argument, and Ray hated it. But he didn't want to argue with his wife. Not tonight, he didn't. Not this close to Christmas. I miss you terribly too. Honestly, I don't know. Hopefully not for too long, but we've talked it all to death. It's part of my job. There's nothing I can do about it, he said. I know, Carol said. I just don't know how much more I can take. Join the club, he said. Are you coming home soon? Will you be here for Christmas at least? She asked. Oh, you've developed a fondness for Christmas, have you? He asked with a chuckle. Of course I want you home right now, but I'm worried about Timmy. You know how much he loves spending Christmas with you, she said. And I love spending Christmas with you two too, even if you hate Christmas, he said. I'm doing my best to get this case over with as soon as possible so I can get out of here and go home for good. So you work at midnight too? She asked. Yes, I'm working 16 hours a day to finish this case. It's a very big project, and I'd like to finish it before the deadline. I understand, Carol said. Just do me a favor and call your son. He misses you very much. I will, Ray said. And Carol? Yes? I love you more than you know, he said. I love you too, honey, she replied. They ended their conversation by exchanging sweet nothings, and Carol went back to her work. She sat at it for a little over an hour before she realized how tired and hungry she was. She shut down her computer, looked around her Spartan office devoid of decorations, put on her coat, then turned off the lights and headed for the exit. Good night, Mrs. Beck, the night guard said as she left the building. Good night, Charlie, she replied, grateful that he hadn't wished her a Merry Christmas. Most of the staff knew how much she hated the holiday. She got in her car and headed home. Her house was easy to spot. It was the only one on the block without Christmas lights and decorations. Ray liked to decorate the house every year, and if she let it go, it could be seen from orbit. He told her it was for Timmy, but really it was for him too. He loved Christmas, and Timmy got that love of the holiday from him. But for most of the last 6 weeks, Ray had been in Seattle, coming home only on weekends to see her and Timmy, except for last weekend. He'd run into a problem, and his whole team had worked all weekend to fix it. At least he'd called every night to say hello and talk to them a little. But that wasn't enough. She pulled into the garage and closed the door. She went into the house and turned off the security alarm. The house was dark and quiet. Too quiet, even. She walked into the living room and was glad Ray didn't have time to decorate and put up the Christmas tree. He loved doing it with Timmy, but this year he just didn't have time. She saw a note on the kitchen table along with the day's mail. It was a note from Alice letting her know that she had put the lasagna in the oven since it was too hot in the refrigerator. She smiled. Alice was such a kind woman and reminded Carol very much of her own mother. She looked through the small stack of mail, bills, credit card ads, and Christmas cards from Ray's family. Of course, all the cards were from his family and now hers. She was an only child, as were her parents. Her grandparents had died before her mother, so she had no one to call family. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins. Just her. Thus, Ray's family became her family. He was from a large family, and they were all so close. She envied him for that. She found the lasagna in the oven where Alice had left it. It was still pretty warm, so she cut off a small piece for herself and sat in the living room watching TV while she ate it. She ate the lasagna, had a glass of wine, locked up the house, and headed upstairs to bed. On the way, she stopped at a picture on the wall. In it, she was pictured with her parents when she was about 7 years old. They were all smiles in the picture and seemed so happy, so full of love. She brushed a tear from her eye as she looked at the photograph. If there was any justice in the world, they would be alive, she thought. At least a little justice. Is that too much to ask? She said quietly before heading for the bedroom. Why can't you be home with me? She asked the pillow. Don't you know how much I need you right now? The pillow didn't answer, so she put it back on Ray's bed. She remembered Jake's words from that day. Yes, Ray is a good husband and father. But he's never around. Lately, it seems like he's always away. One week he's in Miami, the next week he's in Kansas City, and now he's in Seattle. Where will he end up next? And for how long? And yes, even though he makes a pretty good living, she makes a lot more money than he does. That had never bothered her or Ray before, but now, as she pondered Jake's words, her thoughts began to wander, and for the first time in 12 years, she wondered what would happen if she accepted Jake's proposal. She knew several women, some even in the company, who had left their husbands. Some of them were in situations very similar to hers. Husbands were married to work, constantly absent, leaving them home alone to maintain the household. But she wasn't Susie the stay-at-home mom who bakes cookies while her husband brings home the bacon. If anything, she was the primary breadwinner. In that respect, Jake was right. In the past, she'd advised Ray to be more involved in his career, to pursue promotions. But he kept telling her that it didn't work that way in his field. It will happen when the time is right, he'd said the last time they discussed the matter, and it had been before his trip to Seattle. And when will that be? She asked. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, he said. It's different in my job. Guys like me can work at the same level for years before they get promoted. That's the way it works. You don't realize. Things change all the time, and if you don't keep up with the changes, you can fall behind so fast you get dizzy. Well, she thought, if things don't change for the better here soon, they will. And it's going to happen so fast it'll make your head spin, Carol thought. I'm tired of waiting at home all the time. Tired of telling our son that his daddy will be gone for weeks at a time. She thought about the other women and how they talked about their extramarital affairs. As long as their husbands don't know, no one suffers. That's what they said. She thought of Jake and wondered what it would be like to slip into his bed. What it would be like to offer herself to him the way she'd done with Ray. It would be so easy to do, she thought. With Timmy gone and Ray in Seattle, she could easily call Jake and spend the night at his place. No one would ever know. She made herself a cup of tea and, putting on her robe, sat in the front room, mulling over her options. After all, this was the first time she had even considered cheating on her husband. Would she be able to bring herself to do it? However, there was another problem. What if Ray found out? What would he do? Would he divorce her? Or would he understand her needs and let her go out with Jake when he wasn't home? They'd never really discussed the issue directly before, had they? It wasn't on purpose. It was just that the question had never come up, and each of them just assumed the other would be faithful. She really didn't know how he would react. In the end, she decided to take her time and see what would happen after the holiday. When the laundry was done, she put the laundry in the dryer and went back upstairs. She went back to her bed and fell asleep, wondering if she was really going to make it. The next 2 days were basically a repeat of that Monday. She got up early, showered, got dressed, ate a bagel and a cup of coffee, went to work, stayed late, came home, and then went to bed. Every day she talked to Timmy, Ray, and his parents. On Wednesday, she went to George and Alice's house and had dinner with them so she could spend time with Timmy, who was very happy to see her. During those 2 days, she tried to avoid Jake as much as possible. He offered her lunch both days, but she declined, citing her workload. That Wednesday, when she got home from her meeting with Timmy, the phone rang. It was Ray, and she answered it. Are you really home? He asked. Of course I am, she replied. Actually, I just got home. I had dinner with your parents and Timmy tonight. That's what they told me. So I take it you finished all your end-of-the-year stuff? He asked. Pretty much. Just some last-minute formatting left to do, and that's it, she replied. Well, how are things going in Seattle? Actually, it's going very well, he said. We've got everything set up and plan to switch over tomorrow afternoon. If all goes well, we'll be done tomorrow night. So when do you plan to be home? She asked. The earliest I can fly out of here is 2 p.m. on the 24th. There's a 2-hour layover in Denver, so by the time I get home from DFW, it'll be pretty late, he said. But at least I'll be home for Christmas. Promise me? She asked. Of course, he said. God willing, the river won't rise, he added, doing a bad John Wayne impersonation. She laughed. Well, you'd better be home, buckaroo, she said. There's a little boy here who misses you very much. And I miss you too. I miss you guys too, he said. More than you realize. I love you, Ray, she said quietly. I love you too, honey, he said. Are you going to the party tomorrow? Yeah, you know they expect me to be there the whole time, she replied. Are you planning on spending the night there? He asked. Maybe, depends on how I feel, she replied. Be careful, though. I'd hate for you to have an accident, he said. They finished talking and Carol lay in bed, her thoughts scattering in all directions. She loved Ray very much, but some part of her still wanted Jake. The next day, she finished the reports by noon, printed them out and handed them to Jake. He took them from her and calmly looked them over. As always, Carol, you've impressed me with the detail of your reports. I'm sure the board of directors will agree, he said. That's good work. Why don't you finish the job? Give your people a little vacation for the work they've done. You're going to the party tonight, aren't you? Yes, I'll be there, she said. Will your husband be going with you? He asked. He's still in Seattle. He won't be able to leave until tomorrow afternoon, she told him. Jake nodded his head and handed her a card. I took the liberty of booking a room for you just in case. I'd hate to see you get locked up for a DUI. You can check in anytime this afternoon. This wasn't unusual. Executives and board members were usually expected to stay for the entire event and usually gathered for a brief meeting after the party. Thank you for remembering me, she said. I take it you've booked a room in the penthouse as usual? Yes, I booked it. The room has a hot tub and a great view of the city, he said. Perhaps after the meeting you and I can use the hot tub? Feel free to bring your swimsuit if you'd like. Or don't. I'll leave that up to you. Why, Jake Callahan, are you trying to seduce me? She asked with a smile. He smiled back. Would I? He asked. She smiled, shaking her head. You're incorrigible, you know that? She asked. I've been told that a couple times, he replied. I'll see you tonight. See you then, she said. Taking her keycard, she left the office, sent her people home, and went to get ready for the party. After getting her hair and nails done, she went home and packed a few things for the evening, including a tiny bikini she'd bought last summer and pajamas. She didn't usually wear pajamas, but she decided to bring them anyway. She put on blue jeans and a sweater, took the dress she'd dropped off at the dry cleaners for the party, and her high-heeled shoes, and packed everything up. She loaded everything into the car and drove to the downtown hotel where the party was to be held. Carrying her things, she walked into the lobby and headed for the front desk when she heard a man's voice behind her. Excuse me, miss. I think you dropped your keys, the man said. Turning around, she saw an attractive man with the strangest eyes she had ever seen. They were a piercing sky blue color with gold speckles on the sides of the pupils. They seemed to pulsate. He held out a bunch of keys to her. They were her keys, of course. She took them from the man and felt a shock when their hands made contact. Sorry about that, the man said. Must have been static electricity. Must be, she said. Thank you. You're welcome. Merry Christmas, he said with a smile before he left. Yeah, she said. Same to you. She checked in and headed to her room on the 5th floor. There she laid out her things and plunged into the tub, trying not to get her hair wet. When she was done, another thought crossed her mind. Tonight she might be cheating on her husband, for the first time since they'd become exclusive over 12 years ago. For a moment she felt guilty, but the guilt was soon replaced by anger. If Ray were here, she wouldn't even be thinking about this. But he's not here, she told herself. And Jake is. She glanced at her face in the mirror and was immediately stunned. For a moment it seemed to her that her mother's face had somehow transferred to hers. She shrieked and jumped back, but her mother's face disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. What the hell is going on here? She asked herself. She shook her head and splashed water on her face to clear her brain. Gathering her thoughts, she fixed her makeup. It was showtime. By now, the room should have filled up with employees and their guests, so she decided to go downstairs and make her presence known. The first person she saw when she found herself in the room set aside for the corporate dinner was Philip Carson, the chairman of the board of directors. Mrs. Beck, you look lovely tonight, he said with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Carson, she replied. You know my wife Camille, don't you? He asked, pointing to the attractive woman beside him. Yes, of course, Carol replied, extending her hand. It's good to see you again, Mrs. Carson. Please call me Camille, the older woman said. Where is your husband? Isn't he here with you today? No, Ray is stuck on a project in Seattle. He's supposed to fly home tomorrow afternoon, Carol said. I hope he doesn't get caught in bad weather, Philip said. I've heard there will be snowstorms in Denver in the next 24 to 48 hours. I hope so too, Carol said. By the way, I looked over your year-end report. Great job, by the way, he said with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Carson, she said. You're welcome, he said. I think we'd better go and socialize. It's good to see you again, Mrs. Beck. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you too, Carol said through clenched teeth. Taking her drink, she walked down the hall, saying hello to the staff and their guests, and finally ran into Jake. His eyes nearly popped out of his forehead when he saw her. My goodness, Carol, you look well enough to eat, he said. Thank you, kind sir, she replied with a smile. And may I say that you look very dressy yourself? Well, thank you, he said. I've been told I'm pretty good at cleaning. Perhaps after we eat we can enjoy a dance or two. Perhaps, she said with a smile. We'd better take our seats. They're already starting to do something, he said. Carol took the reserved seat and ended up next to a couple of girls from her office. Jake took a seat at the main table, next to Philip and his wife. The rest of the board members were also seated at the head table with their companions. Jake stood up and tapped his glass with his spoon, getting everyone's attention. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Callahan and Sons' annual Christmas party, he said. Philip asked me to be short and sweet so we can get straight to filet mignon, so let's get started. After reading the year-end report provided by Mrs. Carol Beck, our esteemed CFO, I am relieved to report that your bonus checks will not be cut, he said, causing laughter throughout the room. Jokes aside, this has been a challenging year, not just for us, but for everyone in this economy. Nevertheless, this has been a banner year for our company, all thanks to your hard work, dedication, and attention to detail. On behalf of the executive team, the board of directors, and our shareholders, I want to personally thank each and every one of you, he said to applause. And I know next year will be even better. So thank you again. Merry Christmas to everyone. Enjoy. Before continuing, he looked at Philip. How's that going? He asked. Philip smiled and gave a thumbs up, causing more laughter. Carol proceeded to dinner and made small talk with those around her. More than one of them asked about Ray, noticing his apparent absence. After dinner, she noticed that the others had already headed toward the open bar and dance floor. She stood up just as Jake approached her. Great speech, she said. Well, thank you, little lady, he replied. Since we seem to be the only ones here without a date, would you like to dance? Sure, she said, taking a sip of wine. She let him lead her out onto the dance floor and noticed they were being watched. Jake hugged her, but not too close or too tight. Although everyone knew they were friends, they didn't want anyone to get the wrong impression. They danced with different partners throughout the evening, stopping only to get a drink from the open bar. But eventually they started dancing together more often, looking into each other's eyes as they moved around the dance floor. You're so beautiful, Carol, Jake whispered in her ear as they danced to a nice, slow song. She looked into his eyes and was about to suggest they find somewhere more private. But then something happened. Her head suddenly exploded, and she collapsed to the floor, screaming, all thoughts of Jake gone from her mind. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at her worriedly. Jake knelt down beside her and put his arms around her head. Putting one hand on her forehead, he noticed that she had a slight fever. Maybe we should call an ambulance, Philip said. Carol shook her head. No, she said weakly. I'm sure it's just a migraine. Just take me to my room so I can lie down, please. She's been working a lot lately, so she probably just needs rest and something for her head, Jake said. He called over one of the orderlies who brought a glass of water and a package of Tylenol. Jake opened the package and gave her the pills, holding up the glass so she could drink the water. Why don't you let us take her to her room, Mr. Callahan, said Jenny, one of Carol's co-workers. Jake nodded his head and let Jenny and Connie, another employee, carry her upstairs. He watched anxiously as they led her to the elevator. Half an hour later, they came downstairs and reported that they had put her to bed. Is she all right? Should we call a doctor? Jake asked. Asked Jake. I think she'll be fine, said Connie. Her fever seems to be going down and she's already sleeping. I think she's just tired. All last week she's been working herself to exhaustion every night. Good, Jake said. Thanks. I'll check on her in the morning. Maybe she just needs a good night's sleep. Carol woke up in a dark, unfamiliar room and wondered where she was. Looking down, she saw that someone had dressed her in her pajamas. Then she remembered Jenny and Connie helping her into the room. They also helped her change into her pajamas and put her on the bed. She looked at the clock, 12:30 p.m. at night. She dangled her feet off the bed and paused to gather her thoughts. Then she saw a light at the foot of the bed. She turned and saw her parents. Or rather, ghostly images that looked like her parents when she was much younger. Mom? Dad? She asked. Is that really you? Yes, Pumpkin, it's me, her father said, using the nickname he'd used when she was little. How can it be? Asked Carol. I mean, you're dead. How do I know you're not just a dream or the result of undercooked meat? Her mother laughed. No, honey, it's really us, she told Carol. And yes, our bodies are dead. But the thing that makes us who we are, let's call it the soul or spirit, continues to live on. It's complicated, her father said. One day when you come to us, you'll understand that. Why are you here? Asked Carol. What do you want from me? We want you to be happy, said her mother. And we're here to help you not make the same mistake I made so long ago. Mistake? What mistake? Asked Carol confusedly. The image of her mother looked at the ghostly man beside her, then turned back to Carol. My mistake, her mother said. The one that cost your dear father his life. The same mistake you're about to make with Jake Callahan. Jake? Asked Carol, surprised that her dead parents could know about this. We're dead, honey. We're not stupid, her father said with a smile. Right, her mother said. At least be honest with yourself. You want his attention. That's why you're attracted to him. I'm doing nothing of the sort, Carol said. That's not a fair statement. I couldn't agree with you more, Carol. Tell me something. Do you remember how old you were when your father's plane went down? Her mother asked. About 9, replied Carol. The same age as little Timmy is now, said her mother. Carol recoiled at those words. Oh my God, she thought. That's right. Do you remember where you were that Christmas? Her mom asked her. With my grandparents, Carol replied. Again, that's right. Did you ever wonder where I was at that time? I wondered, but Grandma said you were busy with people from your job, Carol said. Actually, it was just one person from my job, her mother said. One man. So you cheated on Daddy? Asked Carol, shocked. Her mother slowly nodded her head. Yes, she said. Your grandmother called your father and told him he should come home as soon as possible. He got on the first plane he could find and rushed back to be with us. Only, he never made it. Oh. Oh my God, Carol said quietly, the realization hitting her. You see, like you, I was angry at your father for being away all the time. I never thought about the fact that he worked so hard so we didn't have to. He worked so we could have a roof over our heads, food in our mouths, and clothes on our backs. But I was too selfish and self-centered to care about that, says the ghostly image of her mother. I wanted what I wanted, and that was all that mattered to me. Sound familiar? The image of her father asked, reminding her of the way he used to talk to her when he corrected her for something she'd done wrong. Oh my God. Yes, familiar, Carol said quietly. And you forgave her for what she did? Where we are, there is no anger or need for revenge or retribution, he said. She was forgiven, and that's all that matters. So yes, I have forgiven her. And this is what exactly? Some kind of intervention? Asked Carol. You could call it that, said her mother. Well, you have my attention, said Carol. I promise that will never happen to me. I love my husband and my little boy. I'm sure you do, Carol, her father said. But that's not the only problem that's bothering you, is it? I suppose not, Carol said. So what's going to happen now? You will be visited by 3 beings, her mother said. Don't tell me, let me guess. Ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, right? Both ghostly images giggled. No, Pumpkin, this is not a Charles Dickens story, her father said. Although the principle is somewhat similar. The first creature will come to visit at 2 in the morning, the second at 3, and the third at 4 in the morning. They'll show you different things so you'll realize that your actions have lasting consequences, her mother said. Why? Why are you doing all this for me? Carol asked. Asked Carol. Well, you asked for justice, said her father. Obviously, we can't be brought back from the dead, but perhaps we can help you avoid the mistakes we made. Not just for you, but for Raymond and little Timmy. Timmy? Asked Carol. Of course, said her mother. Everything you do affects him too. I never thought of that, said Carol. Our time here is almost up, Carol, her father said. It's time for us to go back, but remember that we're always watching over you. Can I have a hug, please? I've missed you guys so much, Carol pleaded. We've missed you too, dear, her mother said. And we'd love to hug you. But unfortunately, we can't contact each other. Just know that we love you and always will, no matter what. I love you, Carol said with tears in her eyes. And we love you too, Pumpkin, her father said with a smile. And with those words, they disappeared into the darkness again. Carol reached out her hand to the empty spot where they had appeared, but felt nothing. Shocked, she crawled back under the covers and looked at the clock. 1 a.m. Surely it was just a dream, she thought. But if it wasn't, it was only an hour before the first visitor arrived, so she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Wake up! Wake up! Carol jumped up at the sound of a voice that brought her out of her slumber. Sitting up in bed, she rubbed her eyes to see who had the nerve to wake her up. She looked at the clock in her room and saw that it was already 2 in the morning. Oh shit, she thought. She looked up and saw a man in her room with eyes that seemed to glow. Something about his appearance seemed familiar to her, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. Get up and go to them, the man called out. Rise and shine. We have places to go and people to see. Who the hell are you? She asked. Well, I'm certainly not the ghost of Christmas past, if that's what you're thinking, the man said. My friends call me Cam, so I guess you can too. Come on, get a move on. Can I at least go to the bathroom? She asked. Well, if you have to, just make it quick, he said. Hurry up. Geez, what is it with you women always having to go to the bathroom? He asked wryly as Carol closed the bathroom door. A few minutes later, she came out and looked at him. And then she remembered where she'd seen him before. I know you, she said. You're the guy who handed me the keys in the hotel lobby. That's right, he said with a smile. Now take my hand and hold on tight. It's time to take a little trip down memory lanes. It was as if he was typing something on an invisible keyboard, and suddenly they were in a room that looked like the living room of a small house. A man and a woman were sitting on a couch watching a young girl play a song on an old piano. A small dark cat sat next to the girl. When she finished, the man and woman clapped their hands and the man hugged the girl. That was so great, Pumpkin, the man said. You're doing really well. Thank you, Daddy, the girl said, and a smile lit up her whole face. Carol brushed a tear from her eye as she watched the scene. Do you remember that? Asked Cam. Carol nodded her head. Yes. I was about 8 years old. I wanted to take piano lessons, and my parents bought an old piano from a church that had just gotten a new one. I took lessons for a little over a year. I loved playing for my dad, she says. I know I sounded terrible, but when he talked it was like listening to Liberos. The cat seems to like it too, Cam said. Twix. I'd almost forgotten about her, said Carol. You named your cat after a candy bar? Asked Cam. Carol laughed. Yeah, it just suited her, she said. How long did you have her? We lost her about 6 months after my father died, she said. It was a nice sunny day and I decided to go for a bike ride. She ran out of the house when I opened the door and got hit by a passing car. The guy tried to go around her, but he couldn't. She died in my arms, she added with tears in her eyes. Please, she pleaded, looking at Cam. Don't make me relive it again. I won't, Cam said. Is that why you never let Timmy have a pet? Yes, that's why, she said. He's such a sweet and sensitive boy. I don't think he could handle losing a pet like that. Interesting, Cam said, looking at her. What about your music? I abandoned it after my father died, she said sadly. I love music, but it just stopped appealing to me. Maybe you should start taking lessons again, he said. I'm too old for that, she said. Besides, I have a stressful job with tons of responsibilities. Nonsense, he said. As long as you're breathing, you're never too old. And if something's important enough, you can always make time for it. Yeah, but that doesn't pay the bills, she said quietly. Uh-huh, he said. So you remember how your mother struggled financially? Yes, she replied, as the landscape in front of them seemed to move in fast forward, like a movie. The next thing Carol saw was her mother sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of envelopes and papers in front of her. She put her head down on her hands and began to sob quietly. Carol saw a teenage version of her sitting in the chair next to her mother. She stared at the bills on the table for a minute, and then hugged her mother. If it helps, Mom, I'll get a job too, she said. Her mother shook her head and looked at Carol. No, honey, she said. Your job is to get an education so you never have to go through this. But I'm 16 now. I'm old enough to get a job. Please, Mother, let me help, young Carol said. Her mother hugged her tightly before she spoke. Thank you for the offer, Carol, she said. It's very sweet. But it's going to be all right. We'll get through this. I want you to focus on your grades so you can get into a good college. If you really want to help, you can do a little more around the house. I'm already thinking about getting a second job. But, Mom, you already work 10 hours a day, young Carol said. I'm worried about your health. I know and I appreciate it, but Mr. Harper said I could come and work a few hours at the nursery, maybe on weekends. He offered to pay me well for my time, she said. Okay. If it helps, I'll help you around the house, okay? Young Carol asked. Her mother smiled and nodded her head. That would be a huge help, honey. Thank you. Cam looked at Carol, tears in her eyes as she recalled the memories playing out before them. Your mother died 5 years later, didn't she? Asked Cam. Tears flowed freely down Carol's face as she recalled that Christmas night. It's okay, I won't make you see it again. Carol nodded her head. Thank you, she said. The last few years before she died, she worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs. She really wanted me to finish college. Even though I took out a student loan, she made sure I had everything I needed. Your mother had a very strong work ethic. And she instilled it in you, didn't she? Asked Cam. Yes, she instilled it. I don't remember her going out on dates or doing anything just for herself after my father died. Even after the doctors told her she needed to slow down. She drove herself to a heart attack, Carol said. I promised myself that I would stay focused and do my best. I wanted to make her proud of me. and I'm sure she is proud. But your whole life hasn't been so sad, has it? You've had some happy memories too, haven't you? Yes, she replied, looking out at the scenery floating before them. I met Ray my senior year of college. He was just a godsend to me, always so happy and supportive of me. I couldn't help but fall in love with him. I wish my parents could have met him. They would have loved him. Yes, they would have loved him, he said, looking at the scenery passing in front of them. And then there was your marriage. I'm sure it was a happy memory, as was your wedding night, he added with a wink and a sly grin. She smiled, and her face flushed as she watched her handsome husband carry her across the threshold to the hotel room where they had spent their first night together as husband and wife. Oh, yes, she said. And then there was the birth of your son, Timmy, he said, as the scenery showed her and Ray in a hospital room with a tiny baby. Ray smiled broadly as he watched his wife breastfeed their little son. Carol smiled too as she watched her young friend nursing her newborn son. Oh yes, I'll never forget that, she said. Ray was so wonderful. You know, my wife and I are having twins in a few months, Cam said. Congratulations, she said. Thank you, he replied. So what happened after college? Well, Ray got a job at Apex International IT Solutions as a network engineer, and I got a job in the accounting department at Callahan & Son, she said, as the scene in front of them changed. At the time, Ray was making more money than me and we were doing well. As time went on, he grew in his career, and the company started sending him on more challenging assignments, some of which were out of the area. Neither of us liked the fact that he had to travel, but we dealt with it. After Timmy was born, he didn't have to travel as often, but as he got older, things picked up, and soon Ray was going away for 1 or 2 weeks a month, depending on the amount of work. Jake and I worked together, but for the first 3 or 4 years of my employment, there wasn't much interaction between us. It was a typical employer-employee relationship. 8 years ago, his wife died in an accident, and that's when he started opening up to me. He seemed to appreciate me letting him vent his frustrations, but nothing bad happened. About a year later, his father retired and he took over as CEO. Since I was senior in the department, I became interim CFO, and later Jake made me permanent. We've been friends ever since, she said, looking at the scenes flashing before them. When did he start expecting more than friendship from you? Asked Cam. I think a couple years after his wife died, she replied. We started going out to lunch and talking about everything in the world. It seemed so innocent at the time. He'd tell me about Ray's work, and I'd listen to his frustration at not being able to find someone to share his life with. Then the petty nagging started. He never liked Ray. I don't know why. Started calling him a nerd or just a computer guy. I'd tell him Ray was more than that, and he'd back off a little. But then he kept digging. Look, I'm not stupid. I know he wanted more from me than just a platonic friendship. But I always thought I could keep things under control. He is my boss, after all. But the backstabbing and taunting started to affect your relationship with Ray, didn't it? Asked Cam, watching the scene in front of them continue to change. Yes, replied Carol. Ray and I started arguing about everything. About his crazy work schedule, about bills, not much of anything. And that's when you started fantasizing about Jake? I have everything in chronological order here, Cam said. Yeah, she admitted quietly. But I never did anything with Jake. I wasn't going to do it with my husband. Until tonight, Cam said, as the scene in front of them changed. In fact, if I hadn't intervened, you'd be in his bed right now, wouldn't you? She looked at him, shocked. You? You're the reason I had a migraine? She asked, as a scene appeared on the screen showing her in Jake's arms on the dance floor. Yes, it was me, Cam said. I hope it wasn't too painful. I had to act fast. Well, you sure saved me from making a big mistake, she said. He nodded his head. Maybe this time, he said. But what about tomorrow? Or the day after tomorrow? Or the next time your husband goes out of town? Or the next time you feel insulted? She turned pale as she listened to him. I wouldn't, she began. That's what you told yourself before, he said. And look what almost happened. You realize he was playing a long game with you, don't you? This isn't the result of a momentary infatuation. He's been at this for years. And I don't think he's going to stop now. Oh, God, she said quietly. Our time is coming to an end, and I need to get you back before the next visitor arrives, he said. Seriously, if I were you, I'd take some time to reevaluate my priorities. Maybe talk to a counselor. Maybe you're right, she said. He nodded his head. Come on, let's go, he said. The pictures in front of them faded, and she found herself back in her room, next to her bed. Cam wasn't there, and she looked at the clock, 5 to 2 a.m. She closed her eyes and tried to rest for a few minutes. But the rest was short-lived. She felt a change in the atmosphere of the room and raised her head. The very shadows in the room seemed to stir and take on a different form, that of a tall man in Western-style clothing, with a battered Stetson and a floor-length duster. When the shadows stopped moving, she found herself looking at a man who looked like he had just stepped out of an old movie. "Who, you?" she asked. The figure smiled, flashing his eyes. "The name is Mir, ma'am." Judge O'Mear. "My friends call me Eli," he said in a distinctive Texas accent, tipping his hat. "And you must be Carol Beck." "Yes, that's me," she said. He nodded his head. "I think you'd better get up so we can move," he said. She stood and watched as he pulled a long rope out of nowhere. One end of it was tied into a lasso, and he threw the rope loop over her body. "What is he going to do to me?" she asked herself. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said. "Things might be a little bumpy." "I don't want to lose you." "Where are we going?" she asked. "This way and that way," he replied. "I understand you're having a little trouble with Christmas." "It's not my favorite time of year," she said. "That's what I've been told. Ma Pa told me he once felt sorry for himself because he didn't have any shoes. And then he met a man who had no feet," he said. "Do you know what I'm talking about?" I think I do," she said. He smiled and pulled up the rope. "Hang in there, little lady," he said. "Don't worry about a thing. I've got you." She saw a bright flash of light and found herself standing on stony ground near a small adobe house. Justice stood beside her and looked up at the house. "Where are we?" she asked. "About 7 or 8 miles from Hard Rock, Texas. Christmas Day, 1854. 1854? She asked, shocked. He nodded his head. "Yes," he said. "Do you hear singing in there?" She listened and heard several people singing old Christmas songs. She made out the familiar tune of Silent Night, and tears came to her eyes. They sounded so happy and joyful. "Yes, I can hear it," she said. "Ma Pa wasn't very religious, but he liked to sing as a family from time to time," Justice said. "Especially at Christmas. My brothers and I used to compete to see who could sing the loudest." Carol looked over and saw several men on horses approaching the small homestead. "Who are these men? Are they Native Americans?" she asked, shocked. Justice looked at the men on horses and nodded his head. "We called them Indians, but yes, that's exactly what they are," he said. "Weren't you scared?" she asked. He grinned, shaking his head. "Not at all," he said. "It was originally their land. Pa made a deal with them when we first arrived. They let us settle here, work the land, tend the animals, and we shared the fruits of our labor with them. By the time we got here, most of the indigenous tribe had gone south, but some stayed. From time to time they would come and we would break bread with them and celebrate. Mother always cooked more in case they came." The door of the small adobe house opened, and 4 men stepped outside to greet the new arrivals. The man in front greeted the guests and invited them inside. "That was my dad," Justice said. As they watched, one of the 4 men laughed at something one of the Native Americans said. Carol looked at the man, then at Justice. "You were the one who laughed, weren't you?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. "That guy I was there with was Windrunner. I never could pronounce his real name, but I was told that's what it meant in English. He could run like no one I'd ever seen before." "So what's so funny?" she asked. An old anecdote. "He was telling me about a white woman he saw in town. A pretty weighty woman, if you know what I mean. Said he wanted to marry her. I asked him why. His answer was always the same. Big, strong woman. Good at pulling a plow. He told me that probably 100 times. I laughed every time." Carol chuckled. "What's going on now?" she asked when the men went into the corral instead of into the house. "That year was pretty rough on everyone in these parts. Pa decided to give them a couple extra cows that year to help them get through the winter," Justice said. "What's this?" she asked as one of the riders held out something long and thin to Eli's father. "A pipe. Made especially for Daddy," Justice said. "As I recall, it also smokes pretty good." When the men returned to the house, 2 women came out of it. "That's my mom and my wife, Lizzie. They came out to let us know that dinner is ready." While they watched, everyone gathered in the small house. "So why are we here?" asked Carol. "To show you that Christmas isn't about feelings or buying presents or what modern society has turned it into. People are born and die every day of the week, even on Christmas Day. It's a day when we celebrate life and love. A day when we remember the birth of a special person, someone who literally gave their life for all of us." Ma Pa understood that, and he made sure we understood it too. "I thought your father wasn't a religious man," she said. "No," Justice said. "He wasn't. He didn't get into all those books and sermons. He even got mad at God once or twice. But he knew how to treat people right, how to give respect, and how to help those who needed it. You don't get that just by breathing air." I guess not, she said. She thought a tear appeared in the corner of his eye. He wiped his face and turned to her. We'd better get back. I'm not usually allowed to do that, and I can't stay here much longer. Besides, I have something to show you, he said. He pulled on the lasso, and Carol found herself standing next to Justice at the bar. The place looked familiar to her, and she remembered that it was a bar Jake had visited from time to time. He'd even taken her there a couple times. She lowered her gaze to the pajamas she was wearing. Don't worry, they can't see you, Justice said. Just watch and listen. She heard a loud conversation at a table where about 6 men were sitting. One of them was named Jake, and he was talking to his friend Alan Michaels. So, are you still trying to get into the Ice Queen's panties? Asked Alan. Carol blushed at this question. She knew that a few men and a few women had called her that, but they had never said it to her face. Now be polite, Jake said. Carol Beck is a good, decent woman. Show some respect, will you? Oh, please, Alan said. You've been trying to get between her legs for years now. Do you think you'll have any luck at the Christmas party this year? I don't know. Maybe, Jake said. You never know what might happen. Is her husband still out of town? Asked Alan. Jake nodded his head. Yeah, that nerd is stuck in Seattle, he said. Well, that's about it. Husband's out of town, wife's here alone, probably crying tears of happiness. Sounds to me like you've got a good chance of nailing this thing. Need anything to melt the ice in her panties? I can offer something good if you need it, Alan said with a smile. No, I don't need any of that, Jake said. Save that for your dates, he added with a chuckle. Everyone else laughed. Seriously, Jake, are you really trying to pick up Carol? Another man asked. She looked over and saw that it was Bill Fredericks, a lawyer who worked at the firm the company used. She didn't deal with him often, but she had seen him around a few times. I mean, it's no secret that you two go out to lunch quite often. People have noticed, you know. It's not just that, Bill, he said. I'm looking for something long-term. I'm getting tired of these one-night stands. And you know me. When I set my mind to something, I succeed no matter how long it takes. Yes, but be very careful, Bill said. If her husband gets proof that you screwed her, he could set you and the whole company up big time. Remember, it's my job to protect the company from that kind of crap. What if I marry her? Asked Jake. Assuming you and the company survive the consequences of any affair you might have with her? Well, you wouldn't be able to keep her as CFO. You know, corporate bylaws don't allow spouses to work together. You'll have to let her go and replace her. Are you sure you're willing to lose the best CFO the company has ever had? Good point, Jake said. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for pouring cold water on all my dreams, buddy. They all laughed. That's probably a good thing, Alan said. Embarrassed, Carol turned to Justice. Get me out of here now, she hissed angrily. He looked at her and nodded his head. Okay, he said. There are a couple other things I think you should see. He pulled the rope, and they found themselves in the penthouse that Jake had reserved for the night of the party. Carol looked up and saw Jake in the double bed. But he wasn't alone. Brenda Spencer, the head of marketing and sales, was with him. Her head rested on Jake's shoulder, and one hand rested on his chest. Brenda was recently divorced and had been caught cheating on her husband on several occasions. Carol noticed small droplets of mucus on her face. She felt like she was going to throw up. I've seen enough, she told Justice. Well then, you should see some more, he told her. He pulled on the lasso and the scene changed to another hotel room, much smaller and cheaper than the penthouse they had just been in. Carol looked at the bed and saw her husband lying on his back, snoring softly. Tears came to her eyes as she looked at him. Looking around the small room, she saw the small digital frame she had given him for his birthday. On the screen flashed pictures of her and Timmy. She looked at the way the frame stood on the dresser. It was positioned so Ray could see the pictures from the bed. And then it hit her why, just as Justice spoke. He loves you so much that he wants your faces to be the first thing he sees in the morning and the last thing he sees when he goes to bed, Eli said. Carol burst into tears as the realization hit her. She had come so close to hurting the man who loved her and their child with all his heart, only for some strange man who saw her as a prize in some sick competition. How could I have been so stupid? She asked between sobs. It happens to the best of us, Justice said quietly. Come on, let's go. Your third guest will be here soon. One last tug of the lasso, and Carol was back in her hotel room, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed tissues and wiped her face as another flash of light suddenly caught her attention. She turned and saw an attractive petite blonde woman standing in front of her. Who are you? Asked Carol. My name is Adrestia Ramnusia, replied the woman. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, so please just call me Dr. A. Are you a real doctor? Asked Carol. I have doctorates in several disciplines, replied Adrestia. She held out her hand to Carol. Please come with me. Carol took her hand, and the two of them found themselves in a long hallway with portals on either side. What is this place? Asked Carol. This is what I call the Hall of Opportunity. Here I can show you what can happen under certain circumstances, said Adrestia. I don't understand, said Carol. You see, Carol Beck, usually by the time I intervene, the evil has already been done. And here I can envision possible scenarios in hopes of averting disaster. Nothing you see here is carved in stone, but will happen if the status quo continues. Do you understand? I think so, Carol said. Adrestia nodded her head. Good. Then let's get started, shall we? Please come with me to the first portal. Don't be intimidated. All you have to do is enter the alcove, and a scenario will play out in front of you. You will not be able to interact with anyone or anything, and no one will interact with you. You may experience lightheadedness, so keep one hand on the side rail at all times. When you feel you've seen enough, just take one step back. Any questions? None, Carol replied. Good. I will monitor your progress and answer any questions you may have. Please, she said, pointing with one hand to the first portal. Carol looked at the portal and stepped carefully into the alcove, holding onto the handrail with her hands. As soon as she stepped inside, she immediately saw her and Ray arguing in their home. How could you do this to us? Asked Ray, his face red with anger. It's just happened, Carol said in a script. I'm really sorry about that. I didn't mean to hurt you. You weren't here and it just happened. Just happened? Are you kidding me? What kind of idiot do you take me for? I don't think you're an idiot at all, she said. Look, we've talked about this before. You're constantly going God knows where, for days or weeks at a time. Yeah, you call every day, but damn it, I'm the one who's left here alone. What, you think I don't miss you when I'm gone? For God's sake, woman, what do you think it's like for me to be away from you and little Timmy? Do you think I don't miss you? No, it's no accident, he said. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying that Jake has been after you for years. Ever since his wife died, he's had his eye on you. You think I don't notice that? You think I'm an idiot or something? He stopped when it hit him. Oh my God. You had fun with him at the company Christmas party, didn't you? While I was in Seattle. She shook her head. No, I had a terrible headache and went to bed early, she said. You expect me to believe that? Asked Ray. Please, Ray, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you, she said. It's not just me you hurt, Carol, he said. This is our son, Timmy. Did you even think about him when Jake was seducing you? I did, she stammered. Ray interrupted her. I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses, he said. I'm going to file for divorce. And know this. I'm going to ask for custody. No, you can't do that. Please, can't we forget about this? There's nothing to forget, he said. You've been telling me nothing but nasty things about my job for months now. And now you're doing this. Well, I hope it was worth it. I'm going out for a couple hours. When I get back, I expect you'll be gone. He grabbed the suitcase that stood in front of the couch and walked away, leaving her sobbing. She came out of the alcove with tears in her eyes. No, please, no, she said, crying. Actions have consequences, Carol, Adrestia said. Please move to the next alcove. She grabbed the railing and stepped inside. This time she saw herself and Jake in the diner. So, did the nerd file for divorce? Asked Jake with a smirk. Yeah, he's filing, she replied. And he's demanding custody, alimony, and child support. Really? Asked Jake. Maintenance? What a loser. And my lawyer says he can get them since I make a lot more money than he does, said Carol. According to the paperwork, he can also prove that I'm not an attentive mother since Timmy had to stay with his parents while he was in Seattle. That sucks, Jake said. Look, why don't you move in with me? It'll be a lot better than living in a motel. And you'll be able to bring Timmy when you get dates. She looked at him, mulling over the options. Yeah, what the hell? I'll check out of the motel and come over. Most of my stuff is still in storage, so I'll need help moving it out. Okay, he said. He looked around for a few moments and then came close to her. Carol, look, I know you're going through a lot right now, but the truth is, I've fallen in love with you. And I know you have feelings for me too. Maybe after the divorce you'll consider marrying me. That was quick, she said. The papers aren't even signed yet. You're right. I do have feelings for you, or I wouldn't have slept with you to begin with. Let me get through this divorce first, and then we'll get back to this issue, okay? Jake nodded his head. Okay, I understand. I've waited so long for you. I can wait a few more months. The scene ended, and Carol backed away from the alcove, her head spinning. Adrestia pointed to the next portal, and Carol stepped inside, holding onto the railing. This time, she saw herself at the front door of the house she had once shared with Ray and Timmy. Knocking on the door, she saw Ray's mother, Alice. "What do you want, Carol?" Alice asked coldly. Asked Alice coldly. Asked Alice coldly. "I've come to pick up Timmy," replied Carol. "Today is my visiting day." "I'm sorry, Carol, but Timmy doesn't want to see you," said Alice. "I'd like to hear it from him if you don't mind," Carol said. "Have it your way," Alice said, stepping aside. Carol walked into the room and saw Timmy sitting on the couch looking straight ahead, oblivious to her presence. "Timmy, I've come to pick you up," she said. "Are you ready to go?" "I'm not going anywhere with you," he said angrily. Carol recoiled back, never before having heard her mild-mannered son speak like that. "But Timmy, it's me, your mom." "I've missed you so much and I really want to see you," she said. "You don't understand, do you?" asked Timmy, his face flushed with anger. "You hurt my daddy. I hate you and I never want to see you again." "Timmy, please," Carol began. Timmy rose from the couch and looked up into her face. She had never seen such anger and hatred in his face before. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." "Never. I hate you. You're not my mother anymore. Get out!" With those words, he stormed up the stairs to his room. She heard his bedroom door slam and started up the stairs until Alice stopped her. "I think you should leave the boy alone, Carol," she said. "You've hurt him. He doesn't want to see you. You've turned him against me." "You bitch! How dare you turn my son against me?" Carol said. Alice folded her arms and looked at Carol like she was a child throwing a tantrum. "I realize you're upset, so I'm going to ignore this outburst. Just this one time, but never again. Ray and I have done everything we can to make sure Timmy understands that you're still his mother." "It's his decision," Alice said. "I think you should leave, Carol." Carol looked at Alice, then slowly stood up and walked out of the house. When she got back to the car, she put her hands on the steering wheel and cried like a baby. "What have I done?" she said through her sobs. The script ended and Carol stepped back, tears falling freely down her face. "How accurate are these scripts?" she asked Adrestia. "Keep in mind, they are based on the assumption that the status quo has not changed. I believe they are a little over 99% accurate. I know it can be painful at times, but as I said, your actions have consequences," Adrestia said. "Please make your way to the next alcove. This script is somewhat disjointed, but I think it adequately captures the essence. It is essentially a summary of the next few years of your life." Carol stepped into the alcove and suddenly saw herself and Ray and their lawyers in the courtroom. The judge was preparing to rule on their divorce. "Having carefully reviewed all information and evidence presented by both parties, I grant the plaintiff's petition for divorce. Plaintiff Raymond Beck will retain sole physical custody of minor child Timothy with visitation rights to the defendant. Plaintiff will also retain full use of the marital residence. Defendant will pay child support in the amount of 20% of her net monthly income. Defendant will also pay child support in the amount of $5,000 per month for not more than 5 years, unless defendant remarries during that time. The defendant will also pay 1/2 of the mortgage on the family home for the same period of time. Both parties may retain their own retirement accounts, but all other marital assets are to be divided with the plaintiff receiving 60% of the assets. The defendant must surrender her wedding rings in accordance with the agreement, as well as revert to her maiden name." "Court is adjourned," he said, tapping his gavel. A stunned Carol turned and walked away from her attorney. The scene changed, and Carol saw herself in the small chapel in her wedding dress, standing next to Jake. They exchanged vows, kissed, and gleefully walked down the aisle to their new life. Before returning, they spent a 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii. When Carol walked into her office, she was greeted by Philip Carson. "Good morning, Mr. Carson," she said with a smile. "What can I do for you?" "Good morning, Mrs. B." "Sorry, Mrs. Callahan," he said. "Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you had a good honeymoon." "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Unfortunately, we have to let you go," he said. "What? Why?" she asked. "Corporate bylaws don't allow spouses to work on the same team," he said. "You and Jake are both on the executive team, so we have no choice but to let you go. However, in light of the fact that you have been with the company for 12 years, we will provide you with a very generous severance package. I want to thank you for your hard work and dedication and will be happy to provide you with a glowing recommendation if required." "Good," she said. "Thank you." At that moment, Jake appeared in her office. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Well, Jake, I'm just giving your fiancée some parting papers. You know the rules about spouses on the same team." "Yeah, but we need her," Jake said. "We'll find someone to take her place," Philip said. However, we have another problem. Bill Fredericks told me that the company just received a lawsuit accusing us of not complying with employee morale regulations. I've also heard that some of our longtime customers aren't too happy with what they've heard. The board of directors will hold an emergency meeting tomorrow at noon to discuss the matter. In the meantime, Jake, you can consider yourself suspended until we make a decision. Have a good day, he added and walked out. Jake and Carol looked at each other in shock. The scene changed again, and Carol was standing in front of the door to the new house she and Jake had bought after he had been forced to sell the large house originally built by his father, the founder of Callahan & Son. The 5 years since that last day at Callahan & Son have been tumultuous. The board of directors fired Jake, quickly replacing him with a new CEO. Unable to find a job he was willing to take, Jake began drinking and was forced to sell the big house. Carol couldn't find a decent job either, and took any job to keep the two of them afloat. Even with Philip's glowing recommendation, she quickly realized that many companies were reluctant to hire someone with her reputation. To cut costs, she sold her expensive car and replaced it with a 2-year-old Corolla. With the amount of alimony and child support she was ordered to pay, her fortune quickly dwindled to almost nothing, and her meager salary couldn't even cover her debts. She tried to convince Ray, but he was adamant. She must pay what the court ordered. If she didn't pay or apply for a modification of the judgment, he would press charges against her, he said. The court reluctantly reduced the payments, but she still struggled to make ends meet. Now that 5 years had passed, she no longer had to pay child support, but child support still had a significant impact on her budget. As for Timmy, she constantly tried to contact him, but he refused her calls, and cards and letters came back unopened. The postmark on the envelopes stung her chest. Return to sender. Refused by addressee. All this because she needs some weird idiot, she thought, as she unlocked the door of their little old house. As soon as she entered the small ranch house, she heard sounds coming from their master bedroom. She walked into the room and saw Jake and a young woman. They stopped to look at her and then went back to their occupation. After spitting in the bathroom, she came back into the room and pounced on them both. "Get out of my house, you goddamn whore!" she yelled at the woman, who was in her early 20s. The young woman, seeing the murderous expression on Carol's face, jumped out of bed and ran out of the house. "You bloody bastard! I destroyed my family and marriage to Ray to be with you, and this is how you repay me? Get out, you vile piece of shit! Get out of my house and never come back!" she screamed. He held up his hands and tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't hear. "Shut up. Just shut up. You ruined my life, you asshole. You won't even lift a finger to do a single thing around here or get a job, but you have time to hook some whore on. Don't say a word. Just get out. Out." By this time, she had already reached into his closet and threw his clothes on the floor. Furious, she went into the bathroom and threw his toiletries into the bedroom while he nervously tried to gather them up. "Don't even pick up your shit! Just leave!" she yelled. A couple hours later, he left, shoving his stuff into the back seat of his car. She sat on the couch and burst into tears, wishing she'd never met Jake. The scene changed again, and this time Carol saw something. She saw an announcement in the newspaper that Raymond Beck was marrying Catherine Hollingsworth. They looked so good in the picture published in the paper. She took a back seat and watched the couple exchange vows. She was shocked when she saw Timmy acting as Ray's best man. It had been 2 years since she had caught Jake in their marital bed with that young girl, and 7 years since she had last worked at Callahan & Son. In his 16 years, Timmy had been a very handsome young man, looking just like his father. Tears ran down her cheeks as she looked at the two men. After the preacher told Ray to kiss his bride, he had them turn to face the audience. "I am proud to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Beck," the preacher said. Everyone applauded, and Timmy turned to Catherine. What he said to her tore at Carol's heart. "Welcome to the family, Mom," he said, and hugged her tightly. No one paid attention to the 42-year-old woman who ran out of the church, sobbing. She returned to her tiny one-bedroom apartment and sobbed, contemplating how to end her life. Carol backed away from the portal, shocked and appalled. She almost fell, but Adrestia picked her up and kept her on her feet. "How much longer do I have to put up with this?" she asked. "There's only one more script and then we're done," Adrestia replied. "It's a bit disturbing, so I'll join you." "More disturbing than what I've already seen?" asked Carol. "I'm afraid so," said Adrestia. They approached the next alcove, and Adrestia took Carol's hand before they stepped inside. "For your information, the further into the future you go, the less accurate it is. However, assuming no other changes, the accuracy is at least 85%. "How far back do we go?" asked Carol. "This scenario is dated 20 years into the future," said Adrestia. You can predict events that far in advance? Asked Carol. As I said, assuming nothing changes in the status quo, yes. But only with 85% accuracy, Adrestia told her. Let's go take a look. Carol tensed as they entered the alcove. The first thing she noticed was the cold air. The digital clock on a nearby building showed 2:15 a.m., the 25th of December. Christmas Day. She realized they were downtown, and the only person on the street was a homeless woman pushing a cart with few belongings. You brought me here to see a homeless woman downtown? Asked Carol. You know, Carol, looking at this scenario, I can't help but think of the words of Charles Dickens. Gloomy, dark, and piercingly cold, this is a night for the well-settled and well-fed to gather around a bright fire and thank God they are home, and for the homeless, starving wretch to lie down and die. At such moments in our bare streets, many a starved outcast closes his eyes, who, let their crimes be what they may have been, can hardly discover them in a more bitter world. What did you think when you saw the homeless man? Oh yes, why can't he get a job like your mother? Adrestia said with a slight note in her voice. Looking at that woman, seeing what you saw this night, do you still think that? Carol looked at the old woman and saw that she was making a plea to someone who wasn't here. She sat down on the cold concrete, holding out her hand. I don't know. What's wrong with her? Asked Carol. She's dying, said Adrestia. What is she dying from? Asked Carol. From several things. For starters, from undiagnosed cancer and malnutrition. She also suffers from mental illness. And on top of that, she's lonely and her heart is broken, said Adrestia. Where is her family? Is there nothing they can do? She has no family left, Adrestia said. She burned that bridge 20 years ago. Carol looked at her, shocked. Isn't there anything you can do? Asked Carol. I am doing something, Adrestia answered her. I'm trying to prevent it in the first place. The woman groaned and fell onto her side, then rolled over onto her back. We have to do something, Carol said as she walked over to the woman. Adrestia joined her. As Carol approached the woman, she looked at her face. It was wrinkled and dirty and her hair was gray and disheveled, but Carol recognized her. It was her. But she was no longer breathing, and her lifeless eyes were wide open. In the old woman's hand was a locket on a chain. The locket was open, and Carol looked at the faded photograph. It was an old photograph of her, Ray and Timmy in happier days. Ray had given her this locket when Timmy was only 5 years old. She dropped to her knees and began to tremble. No. Please, Dr. A. Tell me it's not true. I'm begging you. Tell me it won't happen. Don't let it happen to me. Please, she begged, hot tears streaming down her face. Adrestia looked at her but said nothing. Please. Let it stop. Don't make it anymore. I can't take it anymore, Carol sobbed, her body shaking with sobs. Adrestia lifted her to her feet, and they walked out of the alcove. Carol fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Is this what's going to happen to me? She asked. It's up to you, Carol. It's your choice. It's your life. Make it a good one. Make it meaningful. Adrestia poured a cup of tea on the table near the alcove and held it out to Carol. Here, drink this. It will help you calm down. Carol sipped the hot liquid and felt better. Is all this really going to happen to me? Carol asked. Asked Carol. If things continue as they are now, I guess so, said Adrestia. Only you can change the course of your life. Then I will, said Carol. I promise you, Dr. A, I will be the best wife and mother a man could wish for. Adrestia smiled. I sure hope so for you and your family's sake, she said. Come, it's time for you to go back. Adrestia helped her to her feet, and the next moment Carol was in her hotel room. Exhausted, she climbed back onto her bed, her mind still reeling with images of everything she had seen. Yes, she told herself, big changes were coming in her life. Soon she was sound asleep. When she woke up, she saw that it was only a few minutes before 8 in the morning. Sunlight poured into the room and she stood up, wiping the sleep from her eyes. Going to the bathroom, she made herself a cup of coffee, using the coffee pot kindly provided by the hotel. She thought about her next steps and remembered that she had seen something in the local paper a few days ago. She pulled out her phone and quickly found the information online. Once she found the ad in the paper, she saw that it was still active, so she opened the email app and sent a message to the address listed in the ad. With that done, she went to the bathroom, showered, and dressed in the casual clothes she had brought the night before. Just as she finished brushing her hair, her phone beeped, letting her know she had an email. She looked and saw that it was a reply to the email she had sent earlier. She smiled as she read the message. She sent the reply and looked up, closing the app. Thank you, she said to no one in particular. She started to gather her things left over from the night before and heard a knock on the door. Looking through the peephole, she saw Jake. She took a deep breath, counted to 10, and opened the door. "Good morning," Jake said with a smile. "Mind if I come in?" "Good morning, Jake," she replied. "Sure, come on in. I was just packing from last night." He entered the room and closed the door. "You look much better this morning," he said. "You gave us all a good scare last night." "I feel much better, thank you," she said. "Do you want to go downstairs and get some breakfast?" he asked. "Actually, I'm just packing to go home," she said. "I have a lot to get done before Ray gets back." "Oh," Jake said, somewhat disappointed. After a few awkward minutes, he spoke again. "Carol, can I talk to you for a minute?" "I need to get something out of my head." She stopped packing and looked at him. "Sure," she said. "What's on your mind?" "Well, Carol, the truth is that I do feel attracted to you," he said. "I was wondering if we could get together and perhaps explore our feelings for each other." "Have a seat, Jake," she said after a few moments of silence. "Please." "We need to talk." He sat down in a chair next to the desk in the room, wondering what she was going to say. He didn't like the tone of her voice. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't overly friendly either. She sat down on the bed, turning to face him. "I have to admit that I felt attracted to you too," she began. "In fact, I came too close to acting on that attraction last night. I realized last night it would have been the biggest mistake of my life." "But," Jake began, before she raised her hand to interrupt him. "Please hear me out, Jake," she said. He closed his mouth and waited for her to continue. "Yes, we worked together for a long time. And yes, I considered you a friend and mentor. But I'm married to the man I love with all my heart. To a man I promise to love, honor, cherish, and leave everything else behind until death do us part. And I fully intend to fulfill that promise. I also have a son who will be destroyed if our marriage breaks up. I cannot do that to him. I will not do that to him. So the better man wins after all, huh?" he asked. "We never had a rivalry, Jake," she said. "And yes, he won my heart over 12 years ago. Besides, it didn't take you long to find someone to fill your bed, did it? How long have you and Brenda Spencer been dating?" He looked at her shocked. "How did you find out about her?" he asked. "I'd tell you, but you'd never believe me," she replied with a smile. "Honestly, last night was the first time," he said. "We both had a few drinks after you went to bed, and things went on from there." "I hope things work out for you too," Carol said. "Just be careful. The company has rules about office romances." "Yeah, tell me about it," he said with a chuckle. "And since you're here, I suppose it's only fair that I give you a heads up," she said. "I'll be submitting my resignation on the 3rd of January. "What, you're leaving the company? After all these years on the job?" "I've decided it's time for me to prioritize," she said. "And part of that means leaving Callahan and Son. I've enjoyed working with you and Philip and everyone else, but it's time for a change. Do you realize you are one of the highest paid CFOs in the region? You would be giving up a very lucrative career," he said. "I realize there are things much more important than money or power," she said. "What's gotten into you?" he asked. She smiled, mulling over her answer. "I'd tell you, but you'd never believe me," she said. "Okay, if that's what it takes," he said. "Good luck. I hope things work out for you. Can we at least part as friends?" "I guess so," she said. "But no more than that, do you understand?" "I understand," he said. "I don't like it, but I understand. Shall we have an old friendship hug?" "How about a warm handshake?" she asked in response, extending her hand. He looked at her hand and nodded his head. "Sure, a warm handshake," he said, standing up. They shook hands and Jake headed for the door. "Oh, Jake? One last thing," Carol said, making him stop and turn around to her. "What?" he asked. "Merry Christmas," she said. He looked at her, shocked. "Merry Christmas to you too, friend," he said with a smile. She watched him leave the room and exhaled. She felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. After standing for a few minutes, she went back to gathering her things and headed downstairs to check out. She reached her car and put her things in the trunk. When she looked back toward the street, she saw a young couple with a baby beside their car in the parking lot with the hood up. The woman was crying, holding the baby in her arms, and the man was hugging her. She froze for a moment, contemplating what she should do. In a normal situation, she would have just ignored them and continued on her way without a second thought. Then she remembered what she had witnessed that morning and made a decision. "Rubber is the way to go," she thought as she gathered her purse and headed towards the couple. "Excuse me, is everything okay?" she asked. They both looked at her and she saw tears and a look of sadness on their faces. "No, ma'am, it's not okay," said the man. "What happened?" asked Carol. "Our car just broke down," said the man. "We were on our way to Wichita Falls from San Antonio. My father is dying, and we wanted to get there before Christmas so we could see him before he passed away. I spent the last of my money on gas and the belt broke before we could get on the highway. I was supposed to start working at his store to help the family, but now we can't get there. Carol considered the situation and pulled out her cell phone. Hold on, let's see what we can do, she told them. She looked through her contacts and found what she was looking for. She hit speed dial and waited for an answer. Mike's Towing and Auto Repair. Mike speaking, the man on the other end of the line said. Mike, this is Carol Beck, she said. Good morning, Mrs. Beck. How can we help you today? He asked. Listen, Mike, I'm with a couple that's traveling to Wichita Falls and their car broke down. The man says the belt broke. Could you get someone to fix it? She asked. What kind of car is it? He asked. Hold on, she said. She looked at the man in front of her. What kind of car is this? It's a 1986 Celebrity 2.8-liter V6, the man said. Carol repeated this information to Mike. Wait a minute, Mike said. Yes, I have a snake belt for this car. Where is the car located? She told him where the car was located. Okay, Mike said. I can send someone over in 45 minutes to an hour. Would that be okay with you? That would be perfect, Mike. Thank you. And put it on my tab, okay? Are you sure, Mrs. Beck? Our guys are also doing a quick check and topping up fluids. Coolant may be needed, Mike said. Whatever it takes to get them to Wichita Falls safely, Mike, she said. She and Ray had used Mike's services as their mechanic for years. He was excellent at his job and she trusted him. Yes, ma'am, we'll take care of them for you, he replied enthusiastically. She finished speaking and looked at the family. They looked like they hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. The mechanic will be here in about an hour, she said. Don't worry about a thing. I've already made all the arrangements. It's getting a little chilly in here. Let's go inside and I'll make you some breakfast while you wait, okay? Are you sure? The man said. We can wait here. Nonsense, she said. Come on, it's warm inside. She turned toward the hotel and they followed her inside. When they entered, she led them to a table by the window. When they were seated, a waiter approached them. Are you guests here? The waiter asked. The dining room is for guests only. I was a guest here last night, Carol said, at the Callahan and Son party. You're not going to deny the family breakfast on Christmas Eve, are you? The waiter looked confused for a moment. I guess not, he said. We're running a breakfast special right now. Denver omelet, hash browns, toast, bacon, juice, and coffee. Will that work? Yes, Carol said. 2 servings and some oatmeal or cereal for the baby, please. She pulled out her credit card and held it out to the waiter. On me, she said. When the waiter left, she pulled out 2 $50 bills and held them out to the man. You'll have no trouble getting to Wichita Falls with this money. Ma'am, I can't repay you for this, the man said as he took the money. Don't worry about that, Carol said. Take care of this beautiful family and maybe someday you'll be able to repay them in kind. The young woman looked at Carol with tears in her eyes. Thank you so much, she said. We've had a very difficult year. God bless you. Carol felt tears come to her eyes as she remembered what she had seen when she was with Justice. He's already done it, Carol told the woman. Merry Christmas, the woman said. The man seconded her words. Merry Christmas to you too, Carol said. She left and walked to her car, fighting the tears in her eyes. When she got in the car, she looked up and saw Justice, Dr. A, and Cameron looking at her with smiles on their faces. Cam gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back at them and nodded her head. She put the key in the ignition and looked up, but they were gone. She looked around but saw no sign of them anywhere. Strange, she thought. She got out of the car and headed toward the house. When she got to the street where she lived, she felt like a completely different person. She saw Alice's car parked outside the house and realized that her in-laws had probably brought Timmy home. She pulled into the garage and went inside. Mommy, exclaimed Timmy as she entered the house. The boy put his arms around her and kissed her on the cheek. She hugged him tightly and looked up to see Alice and George. Thank you for looking after him, she said. My pleasure, Alice replied. Are you all right? You look a little different. Actually, I feel better than I have in a long time, Carol said. She looked around the house, noticing the lack of decorations. There wasn't even a Christmas tree in the front room. Something about it didn't feel right. She looked at Timmy again. Honey, do you know where your daddy keeps the Christmas decorations? She asked. George and Alice looked at each other in surprise, and Timmy looked at his mother in shock. It had been a long time since they had used ornaments. Yes, I use, he said. Don't you want to hang them up? Asked Carol. Timmy's face lit up and he smiled. Yes, I'd like to, he said. Dad, could you help Timmy with that? And maybe with the outside lights? Asked Carol. Yes, I'd love to, he said. Timmy, do you know which Christmas CD your dad likes best? Asked Carol. Yes, I do, he said, and walked over to the music cabinet. He looked through the CDs and pulled out one of the Mannheim Steamroller CDs that Ray had bought years ago. He held it out to Carol. He really likes this one. Will you let us listen to it? Sure, honey. It's Christmas, isn't it? Yay, shouted Timmy. George and Alice looked at them and at each other, more surprised than ever, as Carol inserted the disc into the record player. She pressed play and soon music filled the room. Carol smiled widely as the music played. Are you sure you're all right, dear? Asked Alice. Oh, yes, Mom, I'm sure, replied Carol. Now, Timmy, go with Grandpa and do whatever he says, okay? I will, Mommy, he said, grabbing George's hand. Carol heard her phone buzz and looked up to see that Ray had sent her a text message. Got a seat a little early. Leaving Seattle in half an hour. I'll see you soon. Love you. That's great. Love you too, she wrote back. Ray left Seattle on an early flight, she told Alice. Could you help me make cookies and hot chocolate? I'm afraid my culinary skills have been failing me lately, and I could use some help. Yes. What's going on, Carol? I've never seen you so happy and ebullient. I'll tell you later, she said. This is incredible. Okay. I need to hear it, Alice said as they went into the kitchen. Ray was glad he'd been able to leave Seattle early. As it turned out, there was a thunderstorm brewing over Denver, and they missed it by about a half hour. He flew into DFW, loaded up the car, and headed home. As he pulled onto his street, he was surprised to see Christmas lights on his house. He saw his dad and Timmy standing outside with a few neighbors and wondered what was going on. He pulled into his garage and came out to see what all the commotion was about. He was also surprised to hear Christmas music coming from his front room. Daddy! Shouted Timmy, running out to meet his father. Ray picked the boy up in his arms and held him tightly as he walked toward the front yard. He stared in shock at the lights and decorations of his house. Daddy, he said, what's going on? Carol's going to have a seizure when she sees all this. George looked at his son and laughed. Whose idea do you think this was, son? Asked George. Ray looked at him, not knowing what to answer. Carol opened the front door and ran out to meet her husband. Honey, I'm so glad it worked out for you, said Carol. I missed you so much. I missed you too, he replied. What does all this mean? And the music. I thought you hated Christmas. Okay, who are you really and what did you do to my wife? That was the old me, Carol said. The old Ice Queen Scrooge is gone. Forever. Meet the new and improved me. Ray looked at her carefully. Yes, she sounded like Carol, and even looked like Carol. But this woman was happy, cheerful, boisterous even, and he had to admit, more beautiful than he ever remembered. All right, Carol announced. Cookies and hot chocolate for everyone. Please come in. Ray looked at his father dazedly, then greeted everyone inside. Alice and Carol handed out cookies and mugs of hot chocolate. Did you make all this? Asked Ray. Well, with your mom's help, replied Carol. Ray took a bite of the soft chocolate chip cookie and his face lit up. This is really good, he said. Yes, it is, Timmy said, settling down at Ray's feet. If I could have your attention, please. I have an announcement, Carol said from the middle of the room. Everyone looked at her, wondering what she wanted to say. I have an interview Monday morning for a new job. I'm quitting Callahan & Son after the first of the month, she said. When did that happen? Asked Ray in surprise. And why? Today, she answered. As for why, I'll say this. I felt it was time for a change. We'll talk about it later, she told Ray. In that case, I have an announcement to make as well, Ray said. Everyone turned to hear what he had to say. We finished the job in Seattle, ahead of schedule and on budget. The client is thrilled with our work, and so is my boss. He was so thrilled that he promoted me. As of the 3rd of January, I'm the new manager of the local technical operations center. That means a big pay raise and even better, almost no travel. Are you serious, Ray? Asked Carol. No more traveling? Really? That's right, honey. Do you think you could stand it if I was home every day? Oh, honey, that's wonderful news, she said as she hugged Ray. I'd love to have you home every day. Ray hugged his wife, then hugged his son. Congratulations, Ray. This is terrific news, George said, patting Ray on the back. A couple hours later, everyone went to their homes. George and Alice said goodbye, but not before making sure that Carol, Ray, and Timmy would be there the next day to celebrate Christmas. Ray tucked Timmy into bed and read him a story and then went to the bedroom. After making love to his wife, he pulled her close to him. Do you want to explain all this to me? He asked. What happened? The truth? You want to know the truth? Okay, here it is. The truth is that I realized I've been an ungrateful bitch to you for months. Last night I came so close to destroying the best thing in my life, Carol said, holding her thumb and index finger very close together. Ray looked at her, shocked. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. But it almost happened, she said. And I'm terribly sorry it did. Jake Callahan? He asked. Yes, she answered. What happened? I guess you could say a guardian angel intervened, she said. I got a massive headache and ended up going to bed. By myself. And then I was woken up by the mother of all alarm clocks. I realized what was going on and I saw Jake for who he really was. All these years he'd been acting like my friend. In reality, all he wanted was me and to destroy our marriage. I also learned about the possible consequences for our family and I just couldn't deal with it. That's when I decided to change things. This morning I told Jake I was leaving the company, she said. That explains that strange message I got from him earlier, Ray said. What message? Ray grabbed his phone off the nightstand and showed it to her. The best man won. Congratulations, JC. Carol laughed as she read the message. And here I thought he meant it, Ray said. Tell me, woman, do I have to go and kick his ass? No, darling, I have a feeling he's going to get his own ass kicked soon, Carol said. So what's up with the new job? Asked Ray. I remembered seeing an ad for a nationwide nonprofit organization that was looking for a new CFO. I checked the ad this morning and sent an email expressing interest. I got a reply back that they knew about me and would like to see me Monday morning, she said. Yes, but you may just be one of many who applied for the job, he said. No, not really. It turns out that one of the group's board members is married to Callahan's COO, so she already knows me. I got an email saying they'd gotten responses from a few people, but they weren't impressed. The interview on Monday is practically a formality. What kind of nonprofit organization is this? Asked Ray. They help homeless families get back on their feet, she replied. You? Working with the homeless? That's different, he said. Like I said, Ray, I woke up a lot this morning, she said. Up until now, I've only taken care of myself. I've never had time to look around and think about other people. This morning, for example, I ran into a couple who were on their way to Wichita Falls. Their car had broken down and they were stranded. Stuck, hungry, and cold. And no one stopped to help them. So I stopped. Helped? Yes, Carol said, wiping tears from her eyes. I paid for their car repairs and bought them breakfast. Wow. That's a whole other thing, Ray said. That was the first time I ever helped someone, Ray. And you know what? I enjoyed doing it. It felt good. It felt good to know that I actually made a difference in someone's life. That's the kind of person I want to be from now on. I want to be the best wife and mother you could ever wish for. So from now on, the old bitchy Scrooge Carol is gone. I'm sorry I caused you so much pain. You didn't deserve any of this. You're the best person I know. And I promise I will never, ever forget that. I'm so grateful for what I have and I'll never forget it. She pressed herself against Ray and looked into his eyes. I love you with all my heart, Raymond Beck. And I intend to be with you until the day I die, she said. Do you understand me? Yes, I understand, Ray said, wrapping his arms around her. And I accept your apology. But I'm curious about something. What caused all of this to happen? He listened in silence as she told him what she'd been through. Not a bad story, he said. I wish I could meet those guardian angels of yours someday. Who knows? Maybe you will. Someday, she said. The next morning they got up early, opened their presents, and headed out to spend the day with George and Alice. Ray couldn't believe the change that had happened to his wife. She seemed happier now than she had in the last few years. George and Alice noticed the change in her, too. After eating their fill of turkey, dressing, and pie, they returned home about 5 o'clock in the evening. As they drove up to the house, Ray noticed a basket on the porch. He pulled into the garage and the three of them went to investigate the basket. In the basket was a red blanket, and under the blanket was the cutest puppy they had ever seen. As soon as the puppy noticed Timmy, he smiled and raised his paw. Timmy petted the dog and saw a card in the basket. He held the card out to Ray, who opened it and read it with Carol. Merry Christmas, the card read. It was signed Cam. Underneath it was a postscript. He's already been fixed and had all his vaccinations. Ray knew that Cam was one of Carol's guardian angels. Can I keep him, Mommy? Asked Timmy. Please? I'll take very good care of him, I promise. Will you feed and water him? Will you walk him every day? Asked Carol. Yes, Mommy, I will, said the boy. He can even sleep with me if he wants to. Carol regarded the puppy, thinking about it. Every boy needs a puppy, don't you agree? Asked Ray to Carol. Okay, you can keep him, said Carol. Yay, thank you, Mom. You're the best mom ever. I love you so much, he squealed as he hugged her. They gathered up the basket and the dog and went into the house. Carol made them hot chocolate, and they sat down on the couch to watch TV and relax. Ray, do you think the piano would look good in that corner over there? Asked Carol. A piano? He interjected. Are you going to take lessons or something? I used to play when I was a little girl. I'm thinking about getting back into music, she said. What would you like to learn? He asked. I was thinking that maybe I could learn to play Silent Night. It's a beautiful song. Maybe if I get good enough by next Christmas, we could sing it. Together. The whole family, she said. That's an interesting idea, he said quietly. I think we can do it. Thank you, honey, she said. It means so much to me. A movie played on the TV, A Christmas Carol. It was one of Ray's favorite movies. When the movie ended, Timmy turned to them with a smile on his face. God bless us all, Mommy, he said. All of us. Carol looked at her son's face and for a moment thought she saw her father's face superimposed on Timmy's. The face smiled and winked at her and then disappeared. Carol felt a tear come to her eye. God bless us, my precious son, she said as she hugged him. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.